Because tonight we are going to do the impossible, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we have done the impossible multiple times. I'm ready to do it for a third time. We are going to rate every single card in this set for standard playability. Not a whole lot of limited talk or commander or even other formats. We may breach into historic or modern a little bit tonight. But for the most part, we are going to spike it up and talk about how good these cards are going to be in standard. One by one, all 302 cards in the set. But let's remember a few things first. We're using the Luis Scott Vargas system, the LSV system of grading cards 0 through 5. And do remember that 2.5 is actually a really decent score for a Magic card. If I give something a 4 or a 4.5, that means it's going to not only see a fair amount of standard play, but it's going to in some ways take over standard or has the potential to. It could be in multiple decks that are important in standard. So if a card gets a 4 or 4.5, that's ridiculous. A 5 is extremely rare and very likely won't happen tonight. Although it does some of the time, maybe some of these legendary lands. Some of those might. But in any case, again, remember, sometimes people hit me for saying, oh, this card's a 2 or a 2.5. How come? That's a bad score. And it's like, actually, 2.5 means it will probably see play in some niche standard deck here or there. If a card gets a 3 or a 3.5, that probably means it's a really good removal piece, a very good combo piece capable, again, of possibly taking over standard, but it needs another piece, so it's not good enough by itself. There's a lot of things that go into grading cards in this way, but just keep in mind that, a 2, 2.5, not the worst score in the world. And when we get into 3 or 3.5, we're starting to see really, really playable cards that might have life in multiple standard decks. So, aside from that, I think that we are actually seriously ready to go. So let's hit it, everybody, for what is becoming a tradition here on the Twitch and even YouTube channel, because hello, YouTube. I'm sure this will show up there. But let's start it off with the white cards. Move through one by one, alphabetically. Let's look at Ancestral Katana first. This, if you're listening, cooking, driving, whatever, I'm going to kind of give a brief description of what each card does, but not read the entire card or anything. Ancestral Katana is the 2-mana equipment that gives the creature +2/+1, but if a samurai or warrior attacks alone, you can equip this for 1. I think this is probably pretty bad, and there is a red-white equipments deck that's kind of a thing, and it even plays warriors. It's like a warrior/equipment deck that might want this, but even then, is it really worth your 2-drop slot when you've got other things to play in the 2-drop, like a lot of other things to play in the 2-drop slot? So maybe this sees niche play in a niche deck, in which case I think I should give it a 1.75. So like a 1.5, I think, is where this card probably lives. Probably won't see too much play, but it is good in one specific deck. Is it even good in that deck? I don't know. Let's move on to Ao, the Dawn Sky. I actually think there's a chance this is the best 5-drop white creature in Standard. I think you could actually call it that. I don't think this is a terrible card. I really don't. But at the same time, I think it's a little bulky and awkward. If there's a decent white mid-range deck or a mid-range deck that plays white, this might be a card that people could consider. But, if you play green in your deck, you probably want those 5 drops. You want Rin and 7 instead, right? If you play black, you might want Lalt instead of a card like that. So, I think that there are better 5 drops in Standard. And there's even better 5 drops in white, like, Doomscar. Just playing a sweeper is probably better for most decks that play white than a card like this. But I do think that if your mid-range white deck, wants to play some creatures, then this is actually a better option than it looks. And I'm not going to go too deep on the card, but I do think the dice triggers on this are pretty decent. But, we just had Baneslayer Angel in Standard. Didn't see any play, but Baneslayer Angel dies. That's the problem, right? Baneslayer Angel just dies. This, when it dies, at least it does something really, really good for you, almost no matter what the game state is. So I'm going to give this card a 2 and a 2.25. I'm going to give it a 2.25. Possibly, potentially playable, but in what? I have no idea. Banishing Slash is up next. This is the 2-white mana thing that if you have an artifact and an enchantment when you cast it, then you get to destroy damn near anything, and it gives you a 2/2 guy. So this isn't a terrible card. Obviously, if you can facilitate it and get the 2/2, it becomes really, really good. But even if you're not getting the 2/2, it is a card you can play in best of 1, right? That you don't feel embarrassed about playing. It's a thing that kills artifacts and enchantments, a disenchant, that you don't feel bad about playing in your main deck, in best of 1 or best of 3, for that matter. So if you're playing a lot of white, again, this mythical white mid-range deck that I keep bringing up, like, might want a card like this, but only if it can enable it. And enabling it is harder than it might look. Like, you're not enabling it until like turn 4, right? And then it's still a sorcery, so how good is it actually? I think, again, this is still playable, you know, like a 1 or 2 of in certain, very certain decks. So niche playability, but still a removal spell. So I'll give this like a 2.5. I don't think it's too bad. Next is Befriending the Moss. This card is terrible. This is one of the worst sagas in a set full of pretty bad sagas, even if the art is cool on both halves of it, right? This is the other half. Art is cool, but not a great card. Let's give it a 1. Let's move on to Blade Blizzard Kitsune. This is the double strike ninjutsu guy in white. This, probably not very good. Probably not. But double strike on ninjutsu guys is really interesting, especially if you have like anthem effects or something like that. Other ways to boost this dude. Seems kind of cool when you automatically get through with a double striking guy, almost guaranteed. So I think the card is neat, but probably not going to see too much play in standard. But I will end up giving the card like a 1.25. I don't think it's terrible. Born to Drive is born to drive. I've got to say it. It's going to destroy my voice, but I have to say it that way. This is the thing that's an aura that, you know, it gives a creature like +1/+1 for each creature and or vehicle you control. You can also put it on a vehicle, but you can channel it to kind of like raise the alarm, right? Like at instant speed, you can channel it for 3 mana for 2 1/1 guys. And this, I think, is actually an interesting card too. I like the instant speed on this. I'm not really too impressed with the with the aura mode on this, but a few colors got cards like this in this set. I'm not sure if it's a full cycle or not yet, but a few colors got cards like this that effectively have a really good channel mode and kind of a bad aura staple to them. So the aura isn't like completely bad all the time, but really what you really want is the channel mode on cards like these. And I think it's actually not terrible. So I'm going to give this card a 1.75. I think it's kind of okay, but Brilliant Restoration is next. It's a trap. Obligated to tell you this card is a trap and you shouldn't play it. So I'm going to give this card a 2, just because of potential playability in combo decks, and because it's my list and I get to be excited about a card. I'm very excited about this card, but I'm pretty sure that the resto is just not good at all. And I'm obligated to tell you that while I'm in spike mode. But Cloudsteel Kieran is next. I really want this to work with Bruenor Battlehammer for free equip stuff, but I really don't think that it does. So I'm pretty sure I have to grade this card like kind of badly. I don't think it's a great card. I really don't. But Reconfigured 5 is just really bad. So I don't think it's going to come up too much in like most games of Standard. So I'm just going to give this like a 1.5. Fun card. We'll play it, but it's probably not good. Dragonfly Suit is next. Also not good. Just not very good. I am into the low crew cost on this, but the point of a vehicle is that it's supposed to have like much better stats and keyword abilities than its power, than its casting cost, and this doesn't really. So I'm just going to give this like a 1. Iganjo Exemplar is next. This is the 2 mana 1/1 that whenever a samurai or warrior is exalted, it gets +1/+1. Really neat and limited. Probably not great in standard. If there is a samurai or warrior exalted deck in standard, you have to play 4 copies of this. But I'm pretty sure that's a bad deck. So card gets a 1.5. Era of Enlightenment is up next. This is a tempting little saga here. You know, it kind of reminds me of Birth of Melodus. In a way, you know, it's just 2 mana for a white saga, so that reminds me of Birth right there. It scries 2 on chapter 1, that doesn't affect the board state. Gains 2 life on chapter 2, doesn't affect the board state. But then on chapter 3, you get a 2/2 first strike, which is not great on turn 4 at that point. So I'm not really too sure. I will say, this is one of the first chances I get to say this in this video, and hopefully the last. I just have to say it one time. But I actually think that Saga's not going to the graveyard and instead becoming creatures is way better than we think it is right now. I actually think that's huge. You know, like on turn 4, you kind of get a free creature. And then you play another creature. Like, you kind of double spell on creatures. Like, because of these auras, or I keep wanting to say auras, because of these sagas, boards are going to fill up with creatures on turn 4 or 5. Like, a lot in limited, but I don't know about in standard. Obviously, this card again doesn't affect the board state for 2 straight turns, but I still think there's something kind of cool about it, so I'm just going to give it like a 1.75. I think it's kind of interesting. Fall of Lord Khanda is next. If your opponent controls a 4, mana value creature, Suddenly it's pretty good, but otherwise it's not great. You know, it's a 3-mana saga that becomes a 1/3 that when it dies, draw a card. So a lot of utility on this card, especially if you can get a pick out of the removal spell. But that won't always happen. You can't guarantee that it'll happen. It'll almost never happen on curve. So I don't know how I feel about this. It probably won't see too much standard play. I'll end up giving it like a 1.752. But let's move on to Farewell here. This is the 6-mana sweeper that exiles almost everything but Planeswalkers if you want it to. Standard playability-wise, this is a 6-mana sweeper that's probably not as good as Blood on the Snow. And if I had to grade Blood on the Snow right now, I would probably give that card a 3.5. So I'll give this card a 2.5. This card is probably worth a 2.5. But we'll move on to Go Shintai. This is the white shrine, but remember, it does not have the creature type shrine. It has the enchantment type shrine. This is just fine. As far as these go, these shrines in the set, I'm going to have to grade it kind of low. I do think it's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool. Fills your board every turn, gives you blockers. That if you don't use them as blockers, they become attackers, and then your board gets huge. It's inevitability. It's all good. But I think there are better shrines in this set for inevitability than this. So that's what the Shrines deck really wants, is inevitability. So I don't know. I think it's neat, but not as good as it needs to be. So I'm just going to give it like a solid 2 because it goes in the Shrine deck. Right? It goes in one deck, so it's a solid 2. Golden Tail Disciple is the 3-mana 2/3 lifelink. It's just a 1. It's not a great card. Hot Shot Mechanic Fox McCloud is probably a 3. I'm going to give this card a 3. It's the highest rated card so far. Not just because it's a Savannah Lions either. You know, this goes in artifact decks, possibly in multiple formats. Like this goes farther back than standard, very likely. The ability to crew vehicles, you know, as though its power were 2 greater, is actually going to be important in a format that has Isika's Chariot and a couple of other things you want to crew 4 with that we'll actually talk about tonight. At least one thing we'll talk about tonight that I think may be important. So this is one of the better 1-drop 2-power dudes of all time. Just one of the better Savannah Lions of all time. Maybe not better than Usher, but still good. So I'll give this card a solid 3. Extremely playable in multiple decks throughout multiple formats. So good card. Imperial Oath is not good. If this card were instant speed, we'd be talking. It's the 6-mana make 3 2/2 guys and scry 3. Just not a good card. I'll give it a 1. Imperial Recovery Union is next. This is 3 mana for a 3/4, and it crews 2, but it has this neat ability where it can return a creature or a vehicle back from your graveyard to your hand, but only a small one. This is not great. It looks interesting in Limited again. It could maybe potentially take over a game in Limited. And if you have the right 2-drops, it could be a good card, but still not as good as it looks. One thing I will say about this real quickly is that you get the trigger when it attacks, not when it does combat damage. And it has 4 toughness and a relatively low casting cost, so it's likely to survive its first or second combat. So that's pretty good, right? Usually cards like this, like we just saw a 3/2 in the last set, that does something like this, and that's kind of cool, but it's a 3/2, so it won't survive past its first attack step. That's not very good. This has the ability to do that, so again, it might be okay, but I think mostly unlimited. In standard, I'm just giving this like a 1.25. Imperial Subduer is next. This is 3 mana for a 3/2 human samurai that whenever a samurai or warrior exalts, hurting my speed run, but I had to repeat that. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you tap a guy. I like these tappers. I think this is actually kind of neat, again in Limited, but probably nowhere near standard, even if there's a samurai or warrior deck. I'm not sure how good this is, you know, so let's just give it a 1 and move on. Intercessor's Arrest is next. This is, you know, kind of one of the Oblivion rings of the set. There's a couple of them in the set, but this is not as good as the other one. But still, it's a decent removal piece. I'm always feel forced to give these a 2, so I'll give it a 2. Always a decent, somewhat decent removal piece, but probably won't see too much play. So let's bring it down to a 1.75. Invoke Justice, the white of Invoke thing that reanimates stuff. I actually really like this card, but I'm not sure if it's that good in principle. For 5 mana, that's the same rate as most of the reanimation spells in the format. Right, and the best thing you can reanimate right now costs 7 mana, so this just ramps you 2 for basically the same rate as every other reanimation spell in the format. The thing about this is that we do have some really good stuff that it's cool to reanimate with haste and immediately, put 4+1/+1 counters on. Velamicus Lore Hold is a really good example. Swing 9, cast basically whatever you want from the top of your library. So there's some cool things with this, and yes, I do think this could go in 2-color decks. I've had people hit me on that this spoiler season, but I think this could go in decks with Goldspan Dragons that, you can just sacrifice treasures to get 2 white mana, so just sack 2 treasures, or sack 1 treasure, pay 2 white. I think that's realistic in a 2-color deck, so I don't know. I think Invoke is a neat card, but I'm not as high on it as I once was, having some separation, some time to think about it. So I'll just give this card a 2.25. I think if it's good, it's going to be really good. It has the potential to be, the cornerstone critical key card in a deck in Standard at some points during its life cycle. But even then it'll be niche, right? It'll be one deck. And even then it might not be the best deck. So, a 2.5 is about as high as I'd go on a card like this. Kitsune Ace is next. This is just the 2-mana 2/2 Fox Pilot that does cool stuff whenever a vehicle attacks. I think this goes in like a vehicle deck, possibly, but the vehicle deck is kind of looking budget if you're playing cards like this. So I'm just going to give it a 1.25. I don't think it's very good. Kyodai Soul of Kamigawa is next. This is the 4-mana Flash Dragon that Indestructible is a thing when it ETBs. This is probably only playable in the 5-color Dragons deck that plays Tiamat. I think that there's probably multiple better 4-mana Flash options in white right now in this Standard. Although, I will say, when you counter their removal spell and get a 3/3 flyer, probably good. But, Amalgam didn't see much play in Standard, and we all thought that card, Overcharged Amalgam, was going to be incredible. This is just like a weak Overcharged Amalgam. It only really counters removal spells, right? But it is easy to play in the first place. It's really hard to activate, but very easy to play. There could be good things about this card that I'm not, I guess, counting for enough. But at the same time, I don't think this card's good enough on enough axes. And if it does see play, it's only in like one niche Dragons deck that probably isn't going to be very good. Depending. I mean, if mid-range is back on the menu, Tiamat might be real. But again, I still highly doubt it. I'm going to give this card a 2.25, somewhere in there. Just because of the flash, I think brings it up a little bit. But that's probably not. That's probably too high, to be honest. Light the Way is next, though. This, again, niche playability in one deck. This is the 1-mana, put a +1/+1 counter on your, oh god, what's it called? The 1-mana white creature, Lumamancer, on your Clever Lumamancer. Or untap it, or return target Clever Lumamancer to your hand. So it goes in that deck, but not a whole lot of others. I'll give this card a solid 2, but that's about it. Light Paws is next. This one's kind of tough to evaluate. It could be really, really good. Could be really, really not, but I did misevaluate this during spoiler season and still liked it. I thought that you had to get something less than, but you can actually get an aura equal to whatever you've already cast. So that actually makes the card sweet. It kind of feels like Stoneforge Mystic-y, but for auras, and that's kind of dangerous, right? So I'm going to actually tentatively give Light Paws a 3.25. That's an extremely high score, but I think that this card is actually quite good if you can put an aura on it. And, starting on turn 3, you can play this and immediately put an aura on it. And it's possible to get blown out doing that. It really is very possible to get blown out doing that. But I still think there are enough really good plays with this that it could see play in multiple formats. And I don't want to sort of misdiagnose how good this card is. I think it's possible this card is like a 3. And it goes in existing Auras decks and historic and stuff. I think it's really good there. So I think this card has a chance to actually be very good. Very, very good. I'm going to give this card a 3.25. Again, tentatively. But potential sleeper here, but I don't know if we can call it a sleeper because I think people understand how good this card could be. Doubling your mana value on playing spells is broken in a lot of ways, so I love it. I really love it. Especially in a format that gets access to all the glitters, like historic. I think this card is very stupid. So we'll move on to Lion Sash, though. This is the Scavenging Ooze in white. This one's tough because what would I grade Scavenging Ooze, right? I think I would grade Scavenging Ooze like a 3.5. So I think I'm going to give this card a 3.25. somewhere in there. Although maybe it's better than Scooz. It could totally be better than Scooz. It's better against sweepers than Scooz is and all that. but it starts as a creature that can't trade as easily as a Scavenging Ooze. And I kind of think that's going to be a huge deal. When it really comes to the real world, I think this being a 1/1 instead of a 2/2 is going to matter so much. I really do. So I'm gonna grade this on a slight slope downwards from Skoos, but there are ways in which it is potentially better, and I understand that. I do, but still, like you can't equip Scavenging Ooze to a 4/4 in the late game to like a trample guy and get through, So this might be good in that way, but we'll see. 3.25 is still a very, very strong rating. Lucky Offering is a 1. This is not a good card. March of Otherworldly Light, the White March, that exiles stuff. I will give this like a 2.5. I think this is a playable removal spell, and usually removal spells that can see play in multiple decks are worth about a 2.5. So we'll give it that. Michiko's Reign of Truth, Crap Saga. Not a very good saga. I will say I do like this part of it right here. And I do like the fact that for 2 turns, it's just an all that glitters. So, I do, you guys know I love all that glitters. But ultimately, I think this is probably not good. The creature part of it is the best part. The creature part of it is pretty good. And, by the time you get the creature half of it, you have, you've had your 3rd turn to play 2 things, right? Probably. That's how you want to do this. And then on this turn, you get to play like 2 more things and make this like a 5/5 for your 2 mana investment. So like maybe I'm very wrong and this is like way better than I think. Especially considering that, it's kind of hard to disrupt someone who is building a board full of enchantments. Right? Like if I play this on 2 and then I play 2 enchantments on turn 3. And then on turn 4, I play 2 more enchantments or artifacts, right? These are kind of difficult permanents to remove, so this is more likely to be a 5/5 than if it got, +1/+1 for each other creature I controlled, for instance. So this isn't a terrible card. I really don't think this is crap, and I shouldn't have called it crap. I will give this card like a 2.25. It really does have the potential to be something special as like a 2 mana 5/5 that definitely takes some finagling. It does, but I actually don't think it's that bad. I really don't think it's that bad. Especially in a format that has artifact and enchantment creatures. Like let's say you go Fox McCloud on turn 1, and then turn 2 you play this, you can target Fox, and he gets, +1/+1 because he himself is an artifact, right? So I don't know. Like this could be better than I'm judging it, but I don't think it sees play in a top tier standard deck. Let's put it that way. But I'll still give it like a 2 or 2.25. Still a good card. But Moth Rider Patrol is next. Just a 1 mana 1/1 flyer. Not great. In Ninja, I do want to point out that in draft, in sealed and stuff, for your pre-release, this is an interesting card if you're building a blue-white like Flyers deck, obviously. But it's more worth playing 1-drops in this sealed this time around. You want to get through damage for ninjutsu abilities, and we've already seen that white has a creature with ninjutsu, so you don't even have to be playing a ninjutsu deck to care about stuff like that. But blue-white ninjutsu actually doesn't look terrible because it's got a number of decent 1-drops that can get through for combat damage on turn 2, start ninjutsuing. But this is another 1-drop creature that can allow you to ninjutsu easy on turn 2, turn 3. So just keep that in mind for limited, but for standard, it's just not very good at all, is it? Norika is next. Norika is interesting. This is the sister Yamazaki that gets enchantments out of your yard. This is interesting, but again, this kind of has the problem I was describing earlier. This doesn't have to attack, though. Another samurai or warrior could attack, and you get an enchantment out of your yard. So that's kind of interesting. But if this ever has to attack, it will probably die. Like, it better be worth getting that enchantment out of your yard. So I'm just not sure. It's a really cool card, and you can really hope you can rule 0 this in Commander and partner her with her sister in this set and just start reanimating a bunch of artifacts and enchantments out of your yard. It'd be really cool, but I don't think the card sees too much standard play unless I'm just missing something nutso here. So if it was just get a thing out of your graveyard for free, we might be talking, but the fact that you have to cast it, I really don't like. So I'll just give the card like a 1.25. Regent's Authority is next. I'll give the card a 1, even though there's actually kind of a lot of value on this. In a legendary deck, it's pretty decent. In an enchantment deck, it's pretty decent. Or enchantment creature deck, it's pretty decent. And even just the 1 mana mode for, +2/+2 till end of turn is an okay combat trick, but I'm just going to give the card a 1. I don't think it sees much play. Repel the Vile is next. This is the 4 mana instant, but you get to exile a thing with 4 or greater, or you get to power 4 or greater, or exile an enchantment. A little bit of flexibility on the card, but 4 mana is way too much for just about any deck in Standard to want to play. It is removal, though, and it's flexible removal, too, so I'll give it a 1.25. I don't think it's playable at 4 mana. Restoration of Iganjo. Interesting enchantment here. It's a 3 mana saga that puts a plains into your hand, and then you can reanimate a 2-drop, and then you get a 3/4 that can make even more bodies. 3 mana, kind of a high startup cost for this, but I think it's still pretty good. Without going into the card too much, again, we're trying to keep it right, keep it tight tonight. I'm going to give this card like a 2.75. I think this card could be niche playable, and even more than niche playable. If there are multiple white mid-range decks in the format, this probably goes into some of them at the very least. So I don't know. I do like the card more than I should. I think there's a ton of value on it, and 3 mana for the eventual 3/4 body to make more bodies is not a terrible deal. I like this more than I should. Selfless Samurai is next. I give this card a 3. Nowhere near as good as the dog. It's not as good as Selfless Savior, but Selfless Sam is still pretty decent as a 2-drop, and it has extra value on it too. If you want to, right, then stuff can gain lifelink if that's, if the board state calls for it. So I don't know. I think Selfless Sam is still a good card. Selfless Savior, I would probably give like a 3.25 or even a 3.5 to. It's obviously a very good card. This I'll still give like a solid 3. I really will. This is a seize play. Good card. 7-Tail Mentor, however, bad card. It's just a 4 mana 2/3 that gives +1/+1 counters to stuff. It's not good enough. 1. Skyblessed Samurai is... I was thinking earlier, if there is some kind of ridiculous combo deck that allows you to put 6 copies of enchantment tokens into play on turn 2 and then play this, even if that deck were to exist, that deck is probably still generating so much value that it can win without this card. Like, even in the perfect deck for this card, you probably still don't play it. You're probably not right, so I don't know. It's probably at least halfway decent in a format like Limited, where if you can reduce it to a Sarah Angel, it's okay, But in Standard, it's a 1. It's a bad card. Spirited Companion is a white Elvis Visionary, so I really like it, but what decks actually want the card? I don't know of any decks that might really want this, Like maybe some sort of white mid-range deck that presents this as a speed bump, right? You can block with it. Maybe quote-unquote gain some life, because you can block a 3-power dude with this. So you kind of gain 3 life, and you draw a card for 2 mana. This is not terrible. But anytime I see Elvish Visionary, especially in a color that doesn't usually get to just draw cards, I should probably rate that somewhat highly, even if it doesn't have a deck already, just from pure utility. So I'll give this card a 2.75. I know it's a really high score, but let's bring it down. Let's bring it down. Let's give the card a 2.25. I feel like 7.5 was too high. Let's give it a 2.25. Elvis Visionary is a good card. Let's look at Sunblade Samurai next. This is the 4/4 that channels for a plains. I think this is actually pretty good. Like, it gives you a plains and 2 life. It's environmental sciences. The problem is, obviously, environmental sciences, it doesn't take up a slot in your deck. I think that's worth so much. This takes up a slot in your deck, but in exchange for taking up a slot in your deck, you get a 4/4. With vigilance sometimes. I think that's actually pretty good. I actually really do. So I have to give this like a solid 2. I think this card is actually kind of good. Touch the Spirit Realm is next. This is 3 mana for it's an onion ring on one half. It's an oblivion ring, and then on the other half it is a like a momentary blink, right? A Journey to Nowhere. So no, Journey to Nowhere was a removal spell. I should have stuck with momentary blink. This is a good magic card. I'm pretty sure that this is decent, but one thing that tempers this for me is I think that you will use the Oblivion Ring half of this card 80% of the time. 85% of the time. Even if your deck is built with a bunch of things that you want to blink, I think that unless you're in the perfect situation to blink something for incredible value, 9 times out of 10 you'll save this for the removal mode. So it's actually not as flexible as it looks, kind of, because even when you're like, well, I could flash that guy, I could blink that dude right now, But what if my opponent plays like 5/5 or a Planeswalker next turn, and then what do I do? Well, you can't hit Planeswalkers with this, but, you know, what if my opponent plays a huge dude next turn? Like, what do I do? I need this removal spell. It's the only removal spell in my hand, so, you know, if I waste it on the blink, then that'll feel weird. So, I don't know. I think there's actually more tension on this card than it looks like there is. But even that said, it's still like the most flexible Oblivion Ring, like of all time, and that's worth something. So I'll give this card a 2.5. Seriously. Really, it's a removal spell, like a serviceable removal spell, with a really good blink spell stapled onto it. That's probably a good Magic card. So 2.5, just sort of in a vacuum, just based on vacuum power level. Good card. But Wanderer's Intervention is next. This is the white legendary land, but on a card you actually have to play in your deck. Gross. 1, it's bad. I don't care if it's a removal spell, it's bad. Wandering Emperor is next, probably the best white card in the set. I will give the Wandering Emperor a 4. This is a fantastic card. Too many really good play patterns with this. Plays well in control, and actually even plays well in aggro decks. But I think the sweet spot, of course, is mid-range. I think mid-range decks might really like a card like this. 4 mana is where you want a card that sort of turns the game around. And I think this does that in sort of the same way that, like, you know, not the same function, but, you know, it has the sort of same effect on the game in terms of turning it around, stopping your opponent's momentum on turn 4, and then the next turn you get to, you know, again, get even more value. Like a Restoration Angel, in a way, you know? Well, it's 4 mana flash thing, so that's an easy comparison. But again, Restoration Angel was the kind of card that just, like, no matter what your opponent was doing in the early game, it just stopped everything. It gave you way too much value, and I think this card is kind of like that. There's too many play patterns, again, where this card is just good, you know? Like, you, just play it on... Why would I go through all the play patterns? There's too many. There are just too many. Again, there are too many different kinds of decks this goes in, and I think it slots into a couple of important ones on day 1. So whether you're talking about blue-white control, some sort of mono-white mid-range, or even aggro deck, this could slot into, but I doubt the aggro one. Black-white, Blood on the Snow, you know, there are, again, just multiple decks that may want a card like this. And again, the play patterns are just too tight, so I'm going to give the card a 4. I think it's that solid. One of the better cards in the set, and almost certainly the best white card. When We Were Young, though, I just really like this card for the Killer's reference. It's not even really a Killer's reference because it's got the, you know, it's got we instead of you. But still, it's a neat card, but no more than neat. Even in limited, it's not the best combat trick in the world. Give the card a 1. Now I'm going to hit the cough button real quick and take a sip of coffee to rejuvenate my voice. As we look at the blue cards right here, starting with Acquisition Octopus. So, Octopus is neat. It's just a neat Magic card, but I'm not sure how good this actually is. Ophidians like this used to be great. They're not anymore. Let's give it like a 1.25, because the reconfigure cost is reasonable. It really is. Anchor to Reality. This is a cool one too. Sort of tinker for equipments and vehicles. So this card could be good at some point in Magic history. You know, if they print an equipment or a vehicle that's just like ludicrously expensive or otherwise difficult to play or whatever, then like maybe. But at this point, I doubt it. Even in formats that could use a card like this, it's still. I'm not sure how good this one actually is. It's not Tinker. It's just not Tinker. So I'll give it a 2. Obviously a good combo piece, but needs other things to work with it. Right. A little expensive, so, you know, we'll see. Armguard Familiar is next. This card's a 1 in Standard. Even though, hold on now, a 2 mana, 2 power ward? Okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's really not terrible for like an Enchantress deck. Think about it. Could be worse. It's not hexproof. But if you're looking to throw an aura on this on turn 3, you could probably get it off, right? You probably can safely play an aura on this turn 3. So, like maybe, possibly, but probably not. But I just keep that in mind. But Awakened Awareness is next. This is the blue removal spell that can also make your dudes huge for a cost. I was incorrect about this card in spoiler season. For some reason I knew. For some reason I knew that you could put this on your opponent's creatures and make them 1/1s. But I forgot that you can't just put this on a 5/5 and make it a 7/7. You can't do that. If you put it on your dudes, it's still base power 1/1. I do think this is kind of an interesting card. It kind of is, but probably still not good enough. I'm just going to give this card like a 1.25. Blue removal is bad removal, but it's still removal. Behold the Unspeakable. One of the cards in the set that I'm like on the sly, like most interested in. I think this is really neat. It's a 5 mana saga. And that's the only bad thing about the card is the mana cost. But, you know, it Bane Veils on the first turn, and then you get to draw a bunch of cards the second turn. And then on the next turn, it's a thing that has Flample and has power and toughness equal to the cards in your hand. That has the potential to be okay, but 5 mana is probably way too much, so I have to be careful here. I'll give this card a 1.75 because every mode on it is very, very good. But the startup cost is very, very high. Probably too high. So let's acknowledge that, like Roman Reigns. We'll move on to Covert Technician. I'm actually really interested in this card too. I think this might be really, really good on turn 2. You know, if you can get 4 mana value on turn 2 on the play, I think you probably won that game of Magic like a lot of the time. So I think this is actually kind of gooder than in fact it looks. So I'm gonna give Technician like a. God, it's tough. That's tough. I'm going to give Technician a 2.5. I think if you go back into other formats, you know, this is quite good. Just imagine like dropping a Metallic Mimic off of this on turn 2. Sexy? You know, pretty sexy. So, I don't know. If you can enable this on turn 2 and drop a 2-drop artifact creature that goes attacking next turn, like, yeah, I don't know. I think this is a lot of value. All I'm going to say is this is a lot of value. So, I want to give this like a 2.5. I really do. But Discover the Impossible is next. I'm not going to go into it. I want to do a whole 10-minute video on whether or not this and another card that we'll talk about later are good cards. But I'm not going to go into it too much now. I'm just going to give my rating on the card. I think it's a solid 2. Moving on to Disruption Protocol. This is the counterspell that if you have an artifact, it just becomes a counterspell. You know? This is probably good. This card's seen a lot of talk so far. It's probably relatively easy to enable on turn 1, but it needs to be enabled on turn 1 to be good in a lot of situations. However, we have seen where casting Saw It Coming for 2 mana on turn 5 or 6 is still relevant. Like the fact that you're doing it for 2 mana is still relevant later on in the game in this standard. So if you only enable this on turn 3 and then on turn 4 you get to pay 2 mana for this and then do something else for 2 mana, right, and that makes your hands less awkward, then I could see that still being like really relevant a little bit later on in the game. Again, in the same way Saw It Coming is. So I'm going to go ahead. Even if you don't have an artifact later on, it's still a cancel. And that's like, that cancel can be clean some of the time. So I'm going to give this another 2.5. Let's give this a 2.5. I think it's worth that. Essence Capture is next. A perennial 2. Now, again, like I was sort of saying to the stream before I pressed record, I think this is a quintessential 2. This only sees play in a very niche number of decks, but it's a very important card in those decks. But it's still not the best card in those decks. This will see play in a mono blue tempo deck if one exists, and it does look like one exists. Mostly because of this set. A couple of other cards that already existed, right? But, like the blue adversary. But this card in particular will only see play in blue decks that want to counter spells, but also play a ton of creatures. There's really only one of those decks, and it's mono blue tempo. It will only see play in, you know, solid color decks too, you know, mono color blue decks, because once you add a color, it becomes much more difficult to cast this card on curve, so, and reliably in general. So, you know, it really only sees play in the one kind of deck, but it's a really important card in that deck. Still, though, not the best card in that deck. So, 2. This I think Essence Capture does a good job of demonstrating the power level of a 2 some of the time. Good card, obviously. Essence Capture is a good card. It has been important in Standard before. Very likely will be again. Move on to Futurist Operative. This is an interesting card. It's the 4 mana thing that can become a 1/1 unblockable when it attacks. That's interesting, but it's not good enough for Standard playability. I think it costs way too much to get this online. So I'm just going to give it a 1 for Standard play. Futurist Sentinel is next. All cards with Futurist in their name are bad. This is just a vanilla 6/6 that crews for 3. Bad card. It's a 1. Goshintai of Lost Wisdom is the blue shrine. An interesting one that mills, but again, I think there's just more inevitability than this on a lot of the shrines in this set. So I'm going to give it a 2. Again, solid 2. We'll see play in one deck. And it will be an important card in that deck. But Guardians of Oboro is next. This is the 3-mana thing that allows defender guys to attack as though they didn't have a defender. Kind of a meme card, but not an actual card. I'm just going to give this a 1.5. Not a terrible score, obviously, but obviously not a good card either. Inventive Iteration is next. Saga people have been talking about it. It's the 4-mana one that bounces on Chapter 1. Chapter 2 resurrects an artifact or draws a card. And then on Chapter 3, you get a big boy 3/3 with a ridiculous text box. Whenever you cast a spell, opponents can't cast spells with the same mana value until your next turn. This is a pretty tempting text box on this 3/3, but I still don't know if this card is worth 4 mana. This could be one of the best cards in the set or just total garbage. It's one of those, but I don't think it's one of the best cards in the set. I'm going to give this like a 2. You know, like maybe playable, but not amazing. And it's probably less than a 2. 4 mana is a ridiculous startup cost. That's probably too much to get this card going. Invoke the Winds is next. A 5-mana control magic of sorts. You know, in terms of blue removal right now, this is in most cases going to be better than Tempted by the Auric or the 4-mana enchantment. What is it? Grafted something or other. Or Low Mage's Domination. You know, there have been cards like this recently, but this one is just get a thing, untap it. It can also be an artifact. But it has to be played in a mono blue deck. A lot of these thief cards only see play in mono blue decks, so it's no harm, no foul, right? As far as blue removal goes, I like it. Better than a Mind Flayer, you know. So I'll give the card, and I really do, it's way better than Mind Flayer. I'll give the card a 2.25. You know, again, probably niche playable. But only in the one deck. But it's a if it is playable in like a blue mid-range deck, then I probably should only give this a 2, honestly. If it is playable in a blue mid-range deck, it'll be one of the best cards in that deck. Easy. But I don't think blue mid-range by itself is an existent deck. But we'll move on to Jin-Gitaxias. I have to be kind of rough here. Even though this card is like stupid, like read this text box. Like you judge a card by its text box, it's got the best text box in the entire set. But I still think, you know, Hullbreaker Horror is a better card. This probably won't see all the standard play in the world unless it's some kind of reanimation target, in which case Hullbreaker is still probably a better card. So I'm just not too sure about this one, guys. Looks like a commander. So I'm just going to give the card like a... I think you have to respect the text box on the card and give this a 2. I think you do. I know. Look, I get it. It's one of the most expensive cards in the set, if not the most expensive right now. But I don't really care too much about cost. Price-wise. I care about real, pragmatic, realistic standard playability from a spike perspective when I'm in this mode. And I'm just not sure how much play this ends up seeing end of the day. Smoke settles, dust clears, 2. Something like that. Kyrie the Swirling Sky, which I actually think is a much better Magic card. I really do. If this blue mid-range deck exists that I keep describing, this is actually a pretty cool top-end play for it that I think is potentially better than Mordenkainen. If you're going to pay 6 mana in blue, potentially better than Mordenkainen. You know, if you're playing Super Friends or something, then Morty's probably the better card. But Kyrie, I would share the Pow Pow fruit with this card. Kingdom Hearts references, they get you. But I do think this is actually kind of good. If I'm going to pay 6 mana for a creature in Standard, this is kind of what I want it to look like, and I do want it to pay me off if it dies. If I pay 6 mana, if I tap out for a creature, I better get something if the creature gets removed, and this one does a couple of interesting things. So, you know, I don't think this is terrible, but I'm still just going to give this like a 2.5. I think this gets like a 2.5. I don't think it ends up seeing too much play. I really don't, but if it does find a deck, it's probably one of the best cards in that deck, the best creature in that deck. And if you really think about it, sitting across the table from this card is probably a massive headache. It probably is. It has the ward, but when you can finally kill it, you know, it it does something obscene. So I don't know. I kind of do like this card. But in any case, March of Swirling Mist is up next. Blue March is actually better than I thought it was at first glance. You know, when I first read this card, I didn't like it. But it's actually kind of okay if you're just trying to alpha strike your opponent, or even if you're using this as like a fog effect, right? Like, let's say on my opponent's turn, I got 4 mana. I phase out those 3 guys. They can't attack me, and I can attack through them on my turn. I think this is a tricky card, but is it worth the slot in your deck? That's the problem. That's what really tempers this. So I'm just going to give this a 2 baseline. I think it could be playable again in very niche decks, in very niche ways, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure about it. Could be a finisher in the mono blue tempo deck we keep bringing up, though. It could. Because it basically says all your creatures are unblockable. That's really good for ninjutsu tricks, too, and stuff. So, I don't know. Interesting. Tempting. Very tempting card. Mind Link Mech is next. A lot of people like this thing. This is the thing that like becomes a copy of a thing that crews it, but it only crews for 1. It's a 4/3. I don't like this card as much as a lot of people seem to like this card. I think there's probably a lot of really cool tricks with it and stuff, but at the end of the day, I kind of like when it really comes down to it, when you move through all the layers of Dev and you get to the most hardened, grizzled, hard-boiled spike center chewy core of what makes Dev a standard player. I don't like it that much. I really don't think that it's that important unless there's just some unbelievable combo with it that hasn't been discovered yet, or maybe they're waiting to print the card that this works with really, really well. I don't see it. I'm going to give the card like a 2 for now. Playable, again, in very niche decks, but I don't think it's as good as like half the amount of people that evaluate the card seem to think it is. And yeah, I know, a 4/3 flyer is just kind of good for 3 mana, but and a 4/3 flyer crew 1 is especially decent, but I'm just, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hard on it. Maybe I am, but I don't think we're in the kind of standard where this is incredible. I really don't. Where this is what we want to be spending our 3 mana on. I really don't. But Mirror Shell Crab is up next. I like this card too much. I really do. I think the ward is more important than it looks. I think it's a decent reanimation target, a decent ramp payoff, right? There's some sort of like instant speed ramp deck brewing up in this format right now, and this might be one of the payoffs for that. But again, if in your Solar Flare deck, your combination reanimator control deck that plays counterspells and stuff, this is one of your counterspells, but it's also one of your reanimation targets. At the end of the day, though, probably not great. It's probably better things you could be doing with this. Or than this, rather. So I'm just going to give it like a 1.75. Somewhere in there. Mnemonic Spear is next. This is another interesting card. This is the 4 mana, draw 2 cards at instant speed card of the set. But just through a different lens. You have to pay 2 mana at sorcery speed up front. But for that, you get something that procs all of your artifact stuff. Right? However, when you pump the other 2 mana into the card, you can do that at instant speed and then draw your 2 cards. So it's like you get to pay 4 mana in installments, rather than just pay 4 mana up front to draw your 2 like you normally do with these common, 4 mana draw 2s. I think that's kind of interesting. I do. I think there's a lot of cool things about this card. Proccing your artifact stuff is cool. Being able to discard it, draw a card is kind of cool just for the 1 mana. Like maybe you want to fill up your graveyard. Maybe there's a reason to do that. I don't know. I think this card has a lot of cool little things that it does, is all I'm going to say. But I can't rate the card too highly, because even in the decks where it provides a ton of synergy, it's not going to be like the best card in the deck. It's just going to be an important card. So let's give the card a 2 and keep it moving. Mobilizer Mech is up next. This is a 2 mana 3/4 flying vehicle that crews for 3. However, when it crews something else for you, like whatever you want, and that could be really cool. I like the startup cost on this. I like that this is only 2 mana. I like that. It's a world better than 3. It really is. As far as like flying blue vehicles, I like this better than the other one. I really do. Because again, 2 mana is just this huge difference from 3 mana. But I'll still give this one like, around the same score. I'll just give this a 2. I think it has to be enabling things. It has to be enabling things to be truly good. But there might be some stuff that it enables to this righteous degree, especially a little bit later on in the game. I think the card's interesting. But Modern Age is up next. This is a cool card to think about. This is the 2 mana saga that the first 2 chapters draw and then discard, and then the next one gives you a 2/3 flyer. Probably not standard playable, but interesting in these like reanimator builds that want to discard cards, or maybe with flashback or something, but probably still not good enough. Card gets a 1.25. Moon Circuit Hacker is next. This is 2 mana for a 2/1 ninjutsu. Now, when it deals combat damage, you draw a card. But You discard a card unless it entered the battlefield this turn. Pauper players going kind of popping off about this card, talking about how good it is in that format. I'm still not sure this is all it's really cracked up to be, but a 2-mana 2/1 draw a card when it ninjutsus. I mean, technically it's a 1-mana 2/1 draw a card. The best thing the card does is 1-mana 2/1 draw a card. It's good. It's kind of pretty good. So I don't know. In ninjutsu decks, this is pretty much a guaranteed 4 of, I think. Even outside of ninjutsu decks, in like a mono blue tempo deck that has some ninjutsu elements, I think this might be pretty playable. So I'll give the card a 2.5. I think it's actually pretty sick. But Moonfolk Puzzle Maker is next, the 3-mana 1/4 flyer. When it becomes tapped, scry 1. That's neat, but not good enough, right? I love how it's trying to look like Tameo. I know it's a Moonfolk and Moonfolk look like this, but it's even got her clothes. I don't know. Like if you don't look hard enough, it just looks like Tameo for a minute, but it's not. But it's also not a very good card. It's a 1. Moon Snare Prototype, the Springleaf Drum of the set. I feel like I have to give this like a 2.75, right? A little more than niche playable, because this might be playable in multiple decks, and it might be a very, very key card for the decks that do want to play it. Gives you artifact synergy. It's a turn 1 artifact, good with Blackstaff of Waterdeep. You know, it's a ramp piece, but when you draw it in the late game, it's kind of a removal spell. It's just, this card does so many stupid things. So 2.75 at least. We're very close to the 3 threshold on Prototype. I think this is just a wonderful card. Moonsnare Specialist is next. It is not great. It's just not, I know it looks like a Mana War, but it's just not good. It's a 1 in standard. It won't see play even in the ninjutsu deck, I don't think. But Network Disruptor is next. This could see play in the ninjutsu deck. It really could, and the mono blue tempo deck, but it might have to have flash for that. One way or the other, this is a good way to enable ninjutsu on turn 2 and 3. Get through with your 1/1 flyer. All that. And if you do get it late in the game, it still does something. You know? It's more likely to get your flyers through for damage by tapping a guy down. So I don't hate this card, and I will actually give this like a solid 2. Give him a lot of blue cards too here. Planar Incision is not great. I mean, it's a blink. It's a blink, and the thing gets a +1/+1. You can exile an artifact and blink it, and then do a thing with it again. You know, tap it again. So there's cool things about the card, but I still don't think it's incredible. 1.5 just for niche purposes. Prosperous Thief is a card I really like, not only because she's stealing a fish, which is legendary. I don't know why you're stealing a fish. There's 3 other fish you could have stolen. You just wanted the 1, though. Free all the fish while I'm at it. But you're stealing a fish. I just can't get over it. But in any case, create a treasure token when this ninjutsu's in is great. It basically, look at it this way, it only costs you 1 mana for a 3/2. You know, if you ninjutsu this in for 2 mana, create a treasure token. You kind of bolted your opponent, didn't you? If you really want to look at it as sideways as possible, there's a lens through which you paid 1 mana for 3 damage, so you bolted your opponent. But you got a body off of it. I don't know. It's just, I like this card. I think that it's good in rogues decks. It's good in ninja decks. Ninjutsu's in for relatively cheap. Body's okay if you get the ninjutsu on it. Even if you play it on turn 3 for 3 mana and then attack with not it, you can still get a treasure token, right? Like there's a lot that I like about this card. So I'm gonna give this like a 2.5, like 2.75 even. Like it's in that realm. I think the card is potentially very good and leads to great starts. Like notice how busted some ninjutsu starts are, right? Like we were talking about Covert Technician earlier, where you drop like 1-drop flyer, get in with a turn 2, Covert Technician, 2-drop artifact creature. That's 4 mana value on turn 2 on the play. That seems good. And Prosperous Thief seems like it can lead to these same kind of starts, right? 1-drop guy, 2-drop, or turn 2, get in with it, Prosperous Thief, return my 1-drop to my hand, play it again with the treasure, or just play something else with the treasure, or just have 4 mana available on turn 3 because I ramped. Like there's so many starts that Thief leads to that I think are dumb. So I think a 2.5, 2.75 is probably a good score, because when you don't enable the card, it's not good. It's just not. It's not good. But I do think when you do enable the card, it leads to some of the more busted starts you can imagine in standard. So I like it. But Reality Chip is up next. Is the card a meme? Is this card a meme? I'm not actually convinced that it is. I think it might be kind of decent, but I'm still going to give it like a 1.5. It probably won't end up seeing too much standard play, end of the day. But we will see, won't we? We'll see. Reality Heist is next. I think this is mostly priced out, even with the affinity for artifacts, because you have to get artifact cards. Your deck has to be extremely heavy in artifacts. And this might be a player in an extremely artifact-heavy deck, but we might have to wait on that deck, right? For the Brothers War set, which will take some time. So I'm not too sure about this card right now, but I still think it has some potential later on. I'll give it a 2.25. Very important card. In the deck it will eventually go in, but does that deck even exist? I'm not sure. Replication Specialist is up next. Really cool text box. Costs way too much to cast. I'm going to give this like a 1.5. Cyber Trespassers is 5 mana, so it's probably not the best card. I got to bring this up a little bit so that you can actually read the cards. There we go. Cyber Trespassers is not a good card, just a 5 mana 3/5, and it channels to tap 2 guys and freeze them down. That's both modes on this card cost too much. It's a 1. Short Circuit is just 2 mana for a flash, enchant artifact or creature. It gets -3/-0, loses flying. Not good. We'll give it a 1. Sky Swimmer Koi. I'm interested in this card. I've already talked about being interested in this card. It's the 3/3 flyer, but the cool thing about it is whenever an artifact ATBs under your control, you draw a card and then discard a card. That's potentially neat, but still, 4 mana is too much. I'm forced to give the card a 1.25. Spell Pierce. Again, quintessential 2. This card is probably more like a 2.25 because it's somewhat playable in sideboards of other decks. But, Mono Blue Tempo really wants this. Any deck that wants to, live in the first 3 to 4 turns of the game and play creatures and stuff, but still have mana left over to play spells like this, yes, right. It protects creatures. It's really good. It protects your investments. It's really good. Just a fantastic card. But really only good in the first, 5 turns of the game, for the most part. But Spell Pierce has seen a lot of standard play in the past. Probably won't be any different here. We'll give it a 2.25, I think. Suit Up is next. Card's not great. Card's just not really great. It does replace itself by drawing a card, so it's better than a lot of these, but these never see standard play. I don't think this one will either. It's a 1. Tameshi Reality Architect. Cool little Azorius legend here that I actually think is better than it's getting credit for, but it's still a 3 mana investment that you have to wait a turn to do anything with and enable, and this ability costs a lot even if it's really cool. So I don't know. The first ability on the card, this one, whenever one or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card. Ability triggers only once each turn. I think this is the best part of the card. I think this part is actually really good. Like, imagine you play this on turn 4 and then immediately Fading Hope something when this is on the table. That's probably good. But I don't think it's good enough. So I'm just gonna give this like a 2. It's in that realm. Tamiyo's Completion is not good. It's a decent blue removal spell, but it still costs 4 mana at sorcery speed, so it's a 1. Oh no, it's Flash. It's Flash. We have to give it a 1.25. I forgot, but it's still 4 mana removal spell. Those aren't good. Tezzeret Betrayer of Flesh. The Tezzeret in this Seteret is pretty busted. This passive is good. This passive, think about it this way, can generate 4 mana value for you every turn. Like, technically, this Tezzeret can pay for himself the first turn cycle that he's in play. It's pretty good. If you activate something on your turn, the turn you play this, and then something on your opponent's turn, he kind of paid for himself, so that's kind of interesting, but I don't know if it's ultimately good enough. If there's a real artifact deck, this is like one of the most important cards in it. This is one of the cards that makes it tick. So if there's not an artifact deck, though, we just get another Tezzeret that sits on the bench, like the 3rd one in a row, that sits on the bench for 2 years and doesn't do anything. But we will eventually get, I think, a real artifact deck in this format. But at the time being, I think I'm just going to give this card a 2.5. I think this is right now at time of press in standard, one of the worst planeswalkers in the set, but has the potential to eventually be the best planeswalker in the set. All depends on what artifacts we see. It really does. But Thirst for Knowledge is up next. This card has seen standard play before, but will it this time? It's really, you never know with Thirst for Knowledge, with all these Thirst cards now, but Thirst for Knowledge is the OG Thirst card. And usually I am pretty thirsty for it, but I'm not sure this time around. I will give Thirst for Knowledge just kind of a baseline 2. I think that's probably where it belongs. Thousand Face Shadow is the last blue card, rather. I think this is the one-drop blue ninja that's going to matter the most for ninjutsu decks, and possibly even for a mono blue tempo deck that doesn't care so much about ninjutsu but has some ninjutsu elements, right? I think this card is pretty good, but again, just kind of niche playability. We'll give it a 2.25. And that is all the blue cards. So blue has a lot of like decent like 2s, you know, but not a whole lot of cards are just like crazy. Just out of out of this world. But I don't think I have to hit the cough button. I think I just needed a sip of coffee. So let's keep it going. We'll look at black next. I think black actually has some really good cards, and one of them is on screen right now. Let's look at Assassin's Ink. This is not it. Assassin's Ink is the card that Morrow teased and said, you know, oh, you can cast it for 2 mana at instant speed. It kills stuff. You can, but it's really difficult to enable. I personally think that having an artifact and an enchantment is going to be harder to enable in Standard than you think. And even if it's easy to enable, it still won't happen until like turn 4. Most of the time. Possibly turn 3 and all that. So, but then you still won't be able to cast this till turn 4. So I'm not super sure about it. I think I'd probably just rather play Infernal Grasp or Fateful Absence if I'm in white or something. I don't know how great the card's going to be. It's probably really only playable in mono black because of the 2 black pips, no matter how much you decrease the cost of the card. And then if you're playing mono black, do you really have an artifact and an enchantment at all times? I just don't know. I'm not as impressed by this card as I think some people are. Just play Hero's Downfall. It's probably better in a lot of situations. So I think I'll give it a 2. It's a solidly playable removal spell, but that's about it. Biting Palm Ninja, I think, is a really, really good Magic card, to the point where it could be a sleeper. I'm not sure how many people are really focusing on this card right now, but I think this could be just like a not better. I don't want to use the word better, but as a sort of elite spellbinder. Spellbinder always gives you the trigger. It's an enters the battlefield trigger. You know, that's very good. That's very good. This isn't guaranteed. Like, you might ninjutsu this into play, and then your opponent like removes it, and that could suck. But one way or the other, if you do ninjutsu it into play, and it gets through for the combat damage, it does the damage, then suddenly it's just better than Elite Spellbinder, right? Like, you exile a card from their hand forever, and they can never play it for 3 mana, 3 power guy. That checks out, right? That's comparable to an Elite Spellbinder. 3 mana, 3 power dude. Doesn't have the flying, but has more toughness. Has menace, so it does still have, evasion, but this means you can only do the thing once. You can't get through on subsequent turns and keep taking cards out of their hand. But, I still think a 3 mana, 3 power guy, ninjutsu's in for 3 mana. You can make Vampire Hunter D references because he's got a mouth in his hand. Please tell me at least one of you in the chat got that joke. But not only can you make Vampire Hunter D references, but the fact that it's just like 3 mana, 3 power guy, ninjutsu's into play, so like more likely to deal combat damage, right? Like more likely to surprise deal combat damage. And when you do get the effect of the card, it is just better than Elite Spellbinder. I think this card is like really very playable. So I'm gonna give this card like a 2.5, 2.75 even. I think it's up there. Yes, a lot of people got it. A lot of people in chat got that. Thank you. That makes me feel better about my references. But let's move on to Blade of the Oni. Another card I think might like legit be a sleeper in this. I think this card is really good. I think Blade of the Oni is actually quite decent. This is the 2 mana 3/1 menace that you can equip to a dude to make it a 5/5 menace. It's pretty good. I think early in the game this has the potential to do some combat damage because of the evasion. And if you can get through for like 6 damage with this, it has done its job in mono black aggro. And then you just get to like, I don't know, equip your eye twitch and start flying over for 5/5 menace. Like, come on, dude. I think this card is actually kind of sick. I honestly do. And then if they remove the thing this is configured to, you can just start swinging through the 3/1 menace again, or you just equip it to something else. Like you just that's good. Like for the rest of the game, your opponent has to deal with a 5/5 menace. Even if they kill a 5/5 menace, they still have to deal with a 5/5 menace if you have like one other creature. I don't know. This actually looks like kind of pushed and sick to me. especially in mono black aggro, because starting on turn 4, you ain't got nothing to do. It's Friday, you ain't got no job, you ain't got nothing to do. So, you know, you got nothing better to play for 4 mana on turn 4. You might as well play this as your 4-drop, you know, once it's on the battlefield at least. So it's pretty good. It's kind of good to me. I don't know why my voice gets really high when I like cards. Like, it's good to me. I like it a lot. But I think this card is kind of sicker than it looks. And I'm going to give this card a 2.75 as well. I think this card is good. It's fine. And yeah, somebody pointed this out in chat. You know, it gives the creature base PT 5/5. So if the guy has counters on it, that's awesome. You know, it's true. Super true. Even like just equipping it to like a graveyard trespasser. And now you're swinging with a 5/5 menace graveyard trespasser that like, you know, removes a thing, like eats a thing from the graveyard and drains. That's good. It can be, I don't know. It seems good to me. But Chain Flail Centipede is up next. This is not a good Magic card. It's just not. Again, it reconfigures for relatively low, but in the meantime, it's a Scathe Zombies, and then when it equips, it doesn't do much. I don't know. It's not great. Even as a 3-mana 4/2 when it attacks, it's a 1. It's not good. Clawing Torment is next. This is just 1 black mana. For a pseudo deadweight thing, the creature gets -1/-1, can't block, and it makes them lose a life at the beginning of their upkeep. I like this card more than I should. I'm not going to grade it highly. It's just like a 1.25 because it's a pseudo removal spell. But I'm really interested in just a mono black deck that plays like this, and it plays the 2-drop Aura that kind of does this, but they get the chance to sacrifice the creature. But it still has the, you know, beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life. It has that mode on it. I want to play this with Dogged Pursuit and Curse of Leeches, just like all the things that deal a damage a turn to my opponent. I want to play this with those. But is that deck good? No. Card's a 1.25. Debt to the Kami is a better for Rika's Libation, so let's give it a 2.25. It's a good card. It just is. It exiles the thing. That's pretty nuts. Dockside Chef is up next. I should probably just give this card like a 1.5. You know, it's in that area somewhere. It's Skullport Merchant for 1 mana, but not really. It reminds me of Merchant. It doesn't give you any treasure tokens, but it does have the other ability on Skullport Merchant on it. I don't know. It's not good. Maybe it's better than I think because it's just a 1 mana initial investment, but I'd still probably rather play Merchant in most decks. Dokuchai Shadow Walker is next. Not good, Steve. You can ninjutsu it in as a 5/5 for 4 mana. It's still not good. It's a 1. Dokuchai Silencer is next. I always sound like I'm saying like a curse, like a naughty word for like private parts. Dokuchai or Dokuchi. Dokuchi Silencer. It is a naughty word for private parts. Dokuchi Silencer. Silence Dokuchi, son. It's 2 mana for a 2/1 ninjutsu guy, and it has the thing where it destroys a thing. It destroys a thing they control if you discard a creature card. So this could technically be really, really good. This could be like way, way better than it looks, but I doubt it. I kind of doubt that it is that good. So I'm going to tentatively give this a 2. Right? I hate having to discard a creature card, but you ninjutsu'd it into play, so you have a creature card. Right? So, I don't know. Maybe it's really good. Maybe it's just a Necrotal. But having to discard your own creature is not great. But maybe this is really good in Reanimator. Yeah, right? You use this to milkshake a huge guy into your yard, kill one of your opponent's creatures. It could work. Could work. So maybe it's better than I think. But I'm just going to give it a 2 because 2 denotes pretty decent card. Enormous Energy Blade is next. This card's a 1. It's not good. Goshintai of Hidden Cruelty is the removal shrine of the set. This one is pretty good. Doesn't provide the inevitability that pretty much any of them provide. Because some of the mill one provides inevitability. The red one, inevitability. The white one that makes creatures inevitability. This one doesn't really do that. But I still think killing a creature every turn is pretty good. So I'm just going to give it a 2 like the other shrines. 1 shrine I will give a higher score to. Gravelighter is up next. Actually, a surprising amount of value on this. 3 mana 2/2 flyer. When it ETBs, if a creature died, if it's morbid, you draw a card. If it's not morbid, everyone sacks a creature. That's actually kind of good. They gave your, Fleshbag Marauder flying. 1 less point of power, 1 more point of toughness, gave it flying. So PT still adds up to 4, But flying is probably better than an extra point of power in terms of getting in damage some of the time, but not for trading in combat. So there's that. You know, interesting comparison, but I can't really give Fleshbag Marauder more than a 2, right? So I'm just going to give this a 2, even though, again, I really like to flex on this. A Morbid draw a card is actually kind of interesting, but probably won't see play in anything outside of, like, budget decks. Hidetsugu is next, though. Hidetsugu is not the actually great... It's really not. I like the sacrifice a creature scry 2 for just a black mana. I think that's actually a more abusable ability than people are giving it credit for, because everyone is paying attention to the 3 mana ability, which is really cool, but I don't like. You have to wait a whole turn to use it, then it's going to take like that whole turn to use that ability. I don't know. If you win a game with it, then I'm into it. If you can fling something and just win, I'm cool with it. But I fling something, the top card of your library. Technically, you know, it could be good over multiple turns, but it's a 4 mana investment. Card's not super good, guys. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Inkrise Infiltrator is next. Bad magic card. It gets a 1. Invoke Despair, the black Invoke, one of the coolest ones of the cycle. If you could cast it at instant speed, it would be sick. But sadly, you can't. I still think this is a good one, though. I still think this is pretty decent. Kind of reminds me of Casualties of War, but gives your opponent a little bit more control over what they get rid of. That said, in mono black, it can draw cards. I think this could slot in, like maybe people take out 1 copy of Loth, because there's a lot of mono black right now that's playing all 4 copies of Loth. You could duck a copy of Loth, slide one of these in. It's actually not too bad. You might draw cards off of it. You know, you need that in mono black. I'm going to give this a 2.25. I think it's a cool card, but even in the decks that might want it, first of all, there's a deck that might want it. That ups its grade in standard. But even in the deck that might want it, it's just a 1 of, but it's a really impactful card to play in that deck. So I'll give it a 2.25. Junji, the Midnight Sky, may be my favorite of these legendary dragons. I think this one is really very good. It can be a beating no matter what when it dies. And in the meantime, 5/5 Flying Menace is probably going to get through for combat damage. In most situations, if it doesn't, it's very likely going to take something out with it. Also note that the second ability says a graveyard. You can get anything, any non-dragon really, from a graveyard. You can get stuff from your opponent's graveyard. That's pretty slick. But either way, for the most part, I think this is one of the more playable of the legendary dragon cycle in the set. I'll give this a 2.5. I think it's pretty good. Kaito's Pursuit is up next. This is 3. For target player discards too, but this also gives ninjas and rogues menace till end of turn. That's good. That's pretty good. But, you know, I'm not sure it's great on curve where you only have 2 guys. And then you can't put any more mana into like ninjutsuing guys into play if you play this on curve. Right. But if you do play this on like turn 6 in your ninjas deck or something, you should have mana to like ninjutsu a guy or 2 into play. It could work, but even then, I don't think this sees much play in the standard ninjutsu deck, which probably just has better ways to fill its slots. I'll give it a 1.25. Kami, a strictly better Mind Rot, that's good, but still 1.25. Kami of Restless Shadows up next. Not good. It looks good because it gives you value almost no matter what happens, but 5 mana is priced out of any standard playability whatsoever. 1. Kami of Terrible Secrets. This is kind of neat. Because it can draw a card when it ETBs, but 4 mana is a lot. It's just so much. And it's a little bit hard to enable, and if you don't enable, it's just a vanilla 3/4, so 1. Leech Gauntlet is up next. Probably better than it looks. I'll give it a 1.25. This is the thing that gives a creature lifelink, but it also is just a 2 mana 2/2 lifelink. Reconfigure 4 is way too much, but when you do play your 4/4 5/5 flyer or whatever, it's really nice to give it lifelink in certain games, but I still should have really only give this card a 1, but since I just like lifelink, I'll give it a 1.25. Lethal Exploit is next. This is the modified removal spell. I'll just give this a 1.25 as well. Life of Toshiro Yumizawa. This is all the things that Jite does on the front half, and then it becomes a 2/3 that ramps into instants in black. This is actually a really neat card. Like, this is a really, really neat card. It's a 2 mana, turn 4, 2/3, but you can't tap it till turn 5. The cool thing about that, though, is that on turn 5 in black decks right now, this can still help you ramp into Blood on the Snow, and that's kind of good. Kind of good to ramp into Blood on the Snow. Like, you'll still want to cast 6 drops on turn 5 when you can actually ramp with this. Also, these modes are good. Like, you can find something to do with these modes every time. And even if you don't have a creature you want to attack with, You can't kill a creature with the -1/-1. You'll still gain 2 life, and that'll be pretty good against aggressive decks a lot of the time. Like, again, in your Blood on the Snow deck, play this on turn 2, gain 2 life. Turn 3, gain 2 life. Turn 4, well, really, turn 4, wait a minute. Turn 2, turn 3, then turn 4, you get this guy. And turn 5, you can ramp into Blood on the Snow. This guy can block a small creature and survive. That's pretty good. You gain that life, so you don't mind tapping him and paying a life to ramp into Blood on the Snow, right? So, gain a total of 3 life, gain a net 3 life, and ramp into Blood on the Snow a turn early. Probably actually kind of playable. Sometimes kill a guy, right? Sometimes kill creatures. Also very good. So, like, I think this is actually, like, possibly standard playable. Again, in these mono black Blood on the Snow decks, I think I'll give this a 2.25. I do. Very versatile card. Very versatile card. That also is black ramp, something you don't see every day. I like that card. But Long Reach of Night is next, an example of a black saga I do not like at all. I'll give this card a 1. Malicious Malfunction is up next, the Cry of the Carnarium of the set, but it's slightly worse than Cry. I think Cry also immediately hit graveyards. This does not hit graveyards, it just hits play, what's in play, but I still think it's probably playable in sideboards, enough to give it a 2.25. March of Wretched Sorrow is next. A really interesting march, especially when played with Hermit, the pissed off Hermit. What's his stupid name? This deck was on the Patreon poll all last season, and I played with this deck like literally 200 games, and I've forgotten the name of the card. But the Boros Hermit. I just think there's a really niche, like, stupid combo deck where you discard your entire hand and pump all your mana into this and target your own Hermit for like $1 billion. And you're able to, like, hit your opponent for whatever your X was and also gain X life. I don't know. It seems sick to me. But still, I don't think this card is actually super great. It reminds me of Erebos' Intervention. So maybe like niche one-of play in these mono black or black-white decks, or, Esper if that's a deck. Sometimes these control decks do want to gain some life, and this is gain life stapled on to kill a creature. So again, that's one-of playable historically. So I'll give this card like a 2 or a 2.25. I think it's actually pretty decent. I mean, again, decent removal gets like a 2.5, right? So it's in that neighborhood. Mokotai Ambusher is not good. I don't care if you think it's good. 2 mana, 3/2 lifelink. Oh, it's not. Maybe in my mono black deck. No, don't do it. There's better choices. It's a 1.25. Like Mokutai Soul Ripper. This card looks awesome. I really like the way this card looks. 2 mana, 4/3, crew 2, sack an Eye Twitch, sack a Shambling Ghast. And this attacks as a 5/5 or a 5 power. Attacks as a 5 power menace. And that seems good. And you got the value from sacking a thing. I don't know. I think this card is not great considering you have to sacrifice a thing every time. Well, it doesn't. You may. It's a may ability. You may sacrifice an artifact or creature. So there's that. You can get to attacking for 4 on turn 3 with this pretty easily. So, like, I kind of really like this card, but I don't want to rate it too highly. I still think it's a bit of a sleeper, though, in this set. Not a whole lot of eyes on this card for some reason. And I think that it's pretty good, especially if you can turn the downside into an upside when you sack a guy. It gets a counter, so, like, eventually it's swinging as like a 6 or 7 power menace, dude. Like, it crews for relatively cheap. I don't know. I like this guy a lot. So I'm going to give this like a 2.5. I think this is pretty good. But again, I'm tempering that score just a little bit in case I'm very wrong. The card never sees play. Nashi, on the other hand, this is a card I was not super high on at first. But the more I think about it, guys, this is actually probably pretty good. So let's say it's turn 4. You can be on the play, you can be on the draw, doesn't really matter in this analogy. If you're on the draw, you may have already lost too much life, depending on what you're playing against. But one thing that I like about Nashi is that this can get you 2 cards for effectively free. You can only play one of the cards, right? It says until end of turn, you can play one of those cards. but you get 2 looks. You get one at the top of your opponent's and one at the top of yours, and it's free. So let's say that I swing in, I ninjutsu Nashi into play, I bolt my opponent, and the top of one of our libraries is a land. The top of one of our libraries is a 3-drop creature, you know? Well, I can play the 3-drop creature, pay my 3 life. The thing is, that 3-drop creature, I could be playing against a control deck. I could be playing against kind of a mid-range deck. If I'm playing against control, that extra body is going to matter. My life total doesn't matter that much. If I'm up against mid-range, the board state, control of the board state, is what matters the most. Again, my life total might not matter so much. Getting another body untapped that can block onto the battlefield, that's what matters. Same thing against aggro. Against aggro, I may pay my 3 life to play, you know, their 3-drop or something like that. But me playing their 3-drop keeps me from taking 4 damage on the next turn because I can block with the 3-drop I just played, right? Or it keeps me from taking 2 damage on the next turn. It might even invalidate their entire attack against an aggro deck if I play a 3-drop for free with my Nashi off of the attack, right? So, and against an aggro deck, this is interesting too. Against an aggro deck, you're more likely to ninjutsu this into play some of the time, right? Because they may not want to block. They may see that they have some action on the crackback, so they let your little guy through, your Nashi, right? So there's a lot of interesting play patterns with this against all kinds of decks. Against mid-range, it gives you the board presence that you need. Against control, it gives you the board presence that you need. Against aggro, it gives you the board presence that you need. It's just extra board presence for free, or maybe a removal spell. Again, you know, I may pay 2 life to play my opponent's removal spell, but it keeps me from taking 4 damage on the next turn, right? Or 3 damage from their werewolf pack leader. I don't know. But in any case, getting to essentially play the card for free, I think is going to be very, very good. Like, very, very good. The problem is that you're affecting the board state in multiple ways. You're returning something to your hand to play a Nashi tapped, right? So just because you get something from the top of your library, or from the top of a library, doesn't mean that you're super safe in making that attack, even though you'll very likely get an untapped creature. You know, what if you Nashi and you basically whiff? You've already played your land drop for your turn 4. You Nashi, you hit lands on both libraries. That feels bad. That's not good. However, on some turns when you hit lands with Nashi, that feels great because you don't have to pay any life, but you get you get a free land, right? So, I don't know. There's a lot of, sorry for the clap there. There's a lot of really cool situations with Nashi, and there aren't really that many fail cases, but the fail cases are kind of bad. Altogether, though, I've talked about Nashi long enough. You know I'm excited about this card. I'm going to give Nashi a 3, solid 3. I think this card could do some very, very good things in Standard. I think it's better than a lot of people are judging it. This is a good card, in my opinion. But let's move on to Nezumi Blade Blesser. This is not great. This is not a good card. I don't have to talk about it. It's a 1. Nezumi Prowler is up next. This is the Blacklands Paragon of the set, but it's not as good. I don't like it. It's not great. It's not quite Flash. Like, you're not going to do this on your opponent's turn. I think it makes it a worse Blacklands Paragon. And if I had to grade Blacklands Paragon right now, I'd probably give it a 2.25. So let's give this a 1.75. I think it's that much worse. You probably won't play it in your ninjutsu deck. Okiba Reckoner Raid is next. The best part of this card is the jacket, but it is a 1 mana 2/2. You can't swing with it on turn 3, but you do get it on turn 3. You get to swing with a 2/2 menace on turn 4. Vehicles you control have menace is kind of interesting. If you played a vehicle like that 2-drop vehicle we just looked at, Soul Ripper, I think it was called, you play that on turn 2 after a turn 1 this. And then on turn 3, this becomes a turn 2, a 2/2. You can't attack with it, but you can use it to crew Soul Ripper. And it has menace even though you didn't sacrifice a thing. I don't know, it could work. This could be an interesting little deck. Vehicles you control have menace is a really cool line of text for a 1 mana investment. It really is. So, I don't know. I kind of like this card. I think in the Orzhov Vehicles deck with the, Okiba Rat Gang leader guy, this could be interesting, but again, kind of niche. A little, slightly tiny niche. But hell, there's like an Abzan Vehicles deck that looks decent. This is an okay 1-drop for that. But still, mostly just in Vehicles decks. Probably not the best card in the world. I'll give it a 2. Okiba Salvage is up next. Not a great card, but, you know, it's comparable to the white invoke thing. It's a reanimated thing, put counters on it. The only thing here is that you have to put counters on it. You can't choose something else to put counters on, like you can with the white one. And you have to enable it by controlling an artifact or an enchantment. There's probably better 5-mana reanimation spells in Standard than this right now. And 5 mana isn't even really what you want to pay to reanimate stuff. So I'll just give this a 1.5. Reckoner Shakedown up next. Not great. It's just a coercion, but like kind of strictly better than a coercion. You can not have them discard a card if they don't have anything in their hand, or if they don't have anything good in their hand. This is just +2/+1/+1 counters on creatures. So it's never dead, right? You draw this in the late game, your opponent's out of cards. It's not dead. You can still make dudes big. It's probably cool to make a guy big because you know for a fact your opponent doesn't have a removal spell, right? So that's kind of interesting, but still not very playable. I'll give it a 1. Reckoner's Bargain is up next. This is just not as good as Deadly Dispute. If Deadly Dispute wasn't in the format at all, this would probably see play. But Deadly Dispute is in the format, so is Village Rites. This sees no play. It's like a 1. In a vacuum, though, the card's like a 1.75 or a 2. But because of this Standard right now, no play, 1.25 at the most. Return to Action is next. I like when black gets these, save a creature spells, but I don't usually like when they're 2 mana. I'll give this a 1. Soul Transfer is next. It is sorcery speed, but probably better than it looks. This is a 2-for-1. 3 mana, exile a creature or planeswalker and get a guy back from your graveyard. That's pretty good, but again, enabling this is difficult, and you probably aren't enabling this on turn 3. The cool thing, though, is that this is a mid-range card. It's not a card you play on turn 3. It's a card you play on turn 7 along with something else and get a massive amount of value. It's a card you play on turn 6 or 7, exile your opponent's planeswalker, get back a creature, and have the mana left to play it. And in that function, I actually think the card might be worth like a 1 or even 2 of, but very likely a 1 of, in very, very few decks. But still, I don't even know if it's going to get there. But as a decently playable removal spell, I'll give it a 2.25. Tatsunari Toad Rider, one of my sort of sleepers for this set, I think. I think this card is better than it looks. You can play a do-nothing enchantment on the next turn and get another 3/3. So you basically pay 3 mana for 6 power and stats on 2 guys. This guy can go pseudo unblockable, That's kind of cool. Pseudo flying, really. Strictly worse. Well, it's basically just is flying. But I like that. I like that 2 bodies can get through for 6 damage a little easier. And it's not too hard to enable. You can very easily enable this the same turn that you play it if you play it on turn 4. Play it and then play a 1 mana enchantment. 6 power and stats on turn 4. It seems pretty good. But you don't even have to play a do-nothing enchantment on turn 4. It's just my favorite function of the card. You could also just play on the next turn like a Oblivion Ring. We've already seen multiple Oblivion Rings in this video, right? So play an Oblivion Ring, take out your opponent's guy, get a 3/3. That's really good value. I like the value on this guy, and I will give him a 2.75. I think he's that good, but is he really going to see play in Standard? I don't think so. But I really like this dude, like a lot. And again, it's my list. Tribute to Horobi's next. This is the 2 mana opponent gets rats. And then on the third turn it's in play, you get a 3/3 flying haste and your rats back. It also lets you draw cards. I think this card is cool. Is it good? I'm not too sure. I don't know how much damage rats are going to do to you in the early game, but it is important to note there are decks that play Deadly Dispute. I've already said that. There are decks that play Deadly Dispute. You might not be getting your rats back, and you might, in fact, just be enabling your opponent. But one way or the other, 2 mana for, a 3/3 that swings the turn it actually enters the battlefield. So, what do you get this on turn 5, 2, 3, 4? No, you get it on turn 4. Swinging 3 flying. And possibly drawing cards for you. That could be very good, or it could just be mediocre. I'm not really sure, but I do want to err on the side of caution and not give this card a super high rating, but I will give it a 2.25. I do think that there are enough potential spots for this card that it is worth looking at. It really, really is. But I should probably really just give that card a 2, but I'm sticking with it, 2.25. Twisted Embrace is an interesting aura removal spell thing. It's the black aura in this cycle. That you want it to be a removal spell, but it's also an aura. The thing is, though, this one doesn't channel. I still count it as part of this cycle because I see what you're doing, Wizards. But this one doesn't channel away. This is one of the few ones that actually gives you both of the things. The problem is that it's sorcery speed, destroy a target creature or planeswalker, and then it gives +1/+1 to a creature you control or a vehicle. But that's probably not enough value to make this worth 4 mana at sorcery speed, so it's still not a good card. Serviceable removal, 1.25. Undercity Scrounger, really interesting card, but probably not actually as enableable as it looks. You know, Morbid is somewhat enableable, but I don't think it's as good as I want it to be. I'll just give this card a 1.5. But tap it could be really good, but I doubt it. Unforgiving One, although, nah, you can't really do anything with it on until turn 4. That's not. I wish it was better. Unforgiving One is not good. This card's a 1. It's just this card looks like it could be better than it is. You know, whenever it attacks, return a creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. X number of modified creatures you control. But it's not modified. It takes like 3 or 4 dudes to actually do anything. It probably dies on attacks. The card's not good. Give it a 1. Virus Beetle is Burglar Rat with a different creature type. I give Burglar Rats 1.5s. They're okay. And you are already dead. This is the thing that destroys the thing that was already dealt damage. This turn draws a card for 1 mana. Card looks really tempting. I don't think it's worth the opportunity cost in almost any deck. I'll give it a 1.5. That's all of the black cards. And I do have to cough this time, so let me hit the button real quick and take a quick sip of coffee. Okay, I hope that I have enough coffee to last me throughout. But we are in the red cards already. We only have 2 colors, gold cards and artifacts left, plus some lands. So let's move on to Aki Emberkeeper here. This is the 2 mana 2/1. Whenever a non-token modified dude you control dies, you get a 1/1. This is cooler than it looks. You know, and it looks kind of cool, but it is a little bit difficult to enable. You know, it doesn't work with tokens. It only works with modified guys. So it's not just whenever a creature you control dies. It's not that. So don't confuse it for that, but I still think the card is cool. Give it a 1.75 or possibly even a 2, but probably closer to a 1.75. Aki Ronin is next. This is a samurai or warrior attacks alone thing. This is you rummage, discard a card, draw a card. Not great. 1. Aki Warpaint is next. This is just 1 mana for +2/+1. It's an Unholy Strength in red. However, this Unholy Strength can also target your vehicles, so it's kind of a strictly better Unholy Strength in red. Am I wrong? Am I nuts to think this is like potentially playable in a mono red deck? Depending on like if modifying matters, this modifies a creature, right? If enchantments matter in some way or another, right? Like this. I don't know. I don't think that it's playable in this day and age, but it is an Unholy Strength, and I will respect that by giving it a 1.5. Ambitious Assault is next. This is a strictly better Burn Bright, so I am going to personally respect it, even though it's not good. But I will say, you know, we have seen Burn Bright do some pretty stupid things on stream, and just have like 1 modified guy? Yeah, look, 1 modified dude, you draw a card, it replaces itself. That's good. That's good, right? It's not bad. So, I don't know. I'll give the card a 1.5. Won't see any standard play, very likely, but I liked it too much. I like cards like this a lot, more than I should. Sushi, the Blazing Sky. Do I have to tell the joke again where, like, when I go to the Chinese buffet, that's me. I'm at Sushi. That is where I go first. Just for the record, I'm not lying. It's not a joke. That is where I go first. I will eat buffet sushi. I don't care. I don't give a... We'll move on. We'll move on to Sushi. This, probably okay. Pays you back, almost pays you back when it dies in treasure tokens. Treasure tokens are especially good in mono red decks because Goldspan Dragon exists. This could potentially pay you mana value. This could potentially pay you 6 mana when it dies. Or just give you 2 cards. Just draw 2 cards when it dies. Not bad, but is it just a 4 mana 4/4 flying guy like we keep seeing in red, and they're never good? I don't know. Could see playing Dragon's decks, but probably not the best 4-drop Dragon we have access to right now. Probably isn't. One way or the other. Again, just like Baneslayer's example earlier, one of the problems with these 4-drop Dragons, these 4-drop 4/4 flyers that we've seen over the last like 4 years in Standard, one of the reasons they don't see play is because they die. This at least does something when it dies, right? So... could be worth it, but I doubt it. I'll give the card a 2.25. I'm serious. Bronze Plate Boar. This is not good. It reconfigures for 5. 3+2 and Trample is better than you might think it is, but it's almost never going to be worth 5 mana. The card gets a 1. Crackling Emergence looks cooler than it is. It's one of I have to flip it on its head. This card looks cooler than it actually is. It's not actually that cool. I'll give the card a 1.25. Dragon Spark Reactor should have been a rare. This card reads like a rare. I like this card way more than I should like this card. It's actually not very good. Don't fall for it. It's a trap. It's not great. Don't spend your turn 2 doing this. Don't spend 4 mana later in the game doing it. It's just not. It's not going to kill your opponent. It's not going to do the last 4 damage to them and kill a creature. You want it to. I want it to. It looks really cool. Don't do it. It's a trap. 1.5. Actually, if it's a trap, it should be a 1.25. Because the card looks cool. It looks so cool. Card looks awesome. Probably not good. Experimental Synthesizer. Look at all the text on this card for 1 mana. This is draw a card for a mana, and then draw another card later. And get a 2/2. I don't know. I kind of feel like this might also be a trap. But in certain decks, it could be really good. Especially decks that just need 1-drop artifacts. Like the critical mass of cheap artifacts. This is really good. You know, you might play an artifact in this card. And then immediately play another artifact off the top of your library if you have the mana. It's never dead. You know, you draw this on turn 5. You still get to sort of cycle it to draw a card in a way. That's kind of cool. So I like a lot about this card. But is it actually great? Is it actually really super good? I will say it is kind of cool with these like sacrifice an artifact. You know, you deadly dispute. And you get to draw 2, create a treasure token, and this. So, you know, it's got some cool like play lines in multiple decks and standards. So I feel like I'll actually give this card like a 2.25. It's all synergy. It'll never be the best card in the deck, but it will do some neat things for you and potentially very early in the game too. So I kind of like it. Explosive Entry is next. Not good. Not even a strictly better Shatter. They were cowards and couldn't make it a strictly better Shatter. But still don't love it. I'll just give this like a 1.25 because it's technically removal. Spirit Bomb is up next. Explosive Singularity is the name of the card. This is the cheapest mythic in the set at time of writing. So I guess people aren't super excited about this, but it is a Genki Dama. And Genki Dama cool, but I'm just going to give this like a 1.75. Mostly because it's a removal spell. That can end a game, and maybe we'll do so on stream, but it's probably not standard playable. So even 1.75 is too much. Let's look at Fable of the Mirror Breaker next. A lot of people freaking out about this because look, it's Kiki Jiki, but it's not. It's not Kiki Jiki. It isn't. It doesn't have haste. That's enormous. Not having haste is huge. You can't just drop it on turn 5 and immediately play it. You have to play this, give your opponent a couple of turns to deal with it, and then give your opponent a whole turn to deal with this before you can play it. And it costs you mana, so you can't just like do infinite crap with it. It's not Kiki Jiki. I don't actually like this card very much. I do like that it's a 3-mana 2/2 that gives you a treasure token. To me, best part of the card. Also, enables weird reanimator shenanigans and stuff, right? Because you can do the Cathartic Pyre thing with Chapter 2. And then it just gives you another creature. This is a 3-mana card that gives you 4 power and stats that can attack for treasure tokens, and eventually, possibly, maybe, but not likely, do something broken. So I actually think this card is good, but not Kiki. It's not. Stop freaking out. It is not Kiki Jiki. The card gets a 2.5. Flame Discharge is next. Not a very good card. I'll give this a 1 for standard playability, even though it's a removal spell. These never see play. They just don't. They don't do it. Although, again, works with Ornery Hermit or whatever it's called. You can target your own Hermit with this, but don't do it. It's stupid. Gift of Wrath is next. This is 4 mana, so it's bad. It's just 4 mana aura bad, but it does mitigate why auras are bad. Because when the creature this is, equipped to or aura-fied to, the creature this is modifying leaves the battlefield, you still get 2 power in stats, right? You create a 2/2. So it's not terrible, but it is. It's a 1. Go Shintai of Ancient Wars, the red shrine, is my favorite shrine in the set. This is the one that gets a 2.25, a slightly higher score than all of the other shrines, even though this one doesn't affect the battlefield unless you hit Planeswalkers. You can't hit Planeswalkers. For the most part, this one isn't going to affect the battlefield. However, this one gives you the most inevitability of all the shrines in the set, and inevitability is what Shrines wants. Shrines wants to, set up its shields, set up its shrines, and end the game in 3 turns, and this does that. This does that. This is the best shrine in the set, to my mind, in terms of what the Shrines deck is trying to do. This actually closes the game, and not every shrine does that. Matter of fact, we haven't seen a whole lot of shrines that actually close the game yet. In all of Standard history, or all of Magic history, so this one's good. I'll give it a 2.25. Goro Goro is next. This boy, do I want to like this card. I like 2-drops that have relevance late into the game. That's good. Also like the fact this gives dudes haste for just 1 red mana, kind of the Kinrith ability. So that's good. Is it better than some of the red 2-drops you could be playing? I'm not too sure. That said, Mono Red's not even a deck. Mono Red's not really a deck, and Mono Red's a deck this goes in. Or Samurais. I mean, you should put this in Samurai Warriors. But one way or the other, I think I'm forced to give this card like a 2.25. Because even if it's like the best 2-drop in Mono Red's probably still not a deck. Probably not. But still, 2.25 is, I have to reiterate, a good score. Red Yamazaki up next. The Red Yamazaki's fine. Suffers from the same problems as her sister, you know. Cool, but in a way worse because it costs 1 more mana to cast. You know, I want to like this card. I want to like the other card too, but I just don't. I'll give it like a 1.75. Invoke Calamity's up next. My favorite of the Invoke cycle, I think. The green one is interesting. The green one actually isn't interesting. It's just raw power. Invoke Calamity is cool because it goes in a bunch of different decks. This can cast weird stuff that's really hard to cast from your hand, from your graveyard too, you know. It can just be like your finisher in a burn deck. That's probably the best thing you can do with it. At instant speed, you can get a counter spell out of your graveyard and play that while also playing a burn spell out of your yard or something. Like, there's just so many cool things this does. And I think that there's probably enough interesting things with it that it sees standard play. The instant speed is key on this, right? If it weren't instant speed, I don't think it would see much play. But again, instant speed and is it deck? Yes, I think this is playable in 2-colored decks. Again, especially decks that have access to Goldspan Dragon. This card is extremely easy to pop off. So, I don't know, guys. I don't know. I think this is actually really quite good. Not the best card in the set or anything. Not the best card in standard, so I can't grade it too high, but I will give the card a 2.5. I think it's good. Ironhoof Boar is next. Interesting. I like that it discards as kind of a run amok. I think I'm getting my cards right there. Just kind of a strictly better run amok in that way. But it's not, because run amok is often in decks. Let me just throw this out there. Run amok is often in decks that have like prowess creatures that want you to cast instants and sorceries. This isn't casting an instant or sorcery, so it won't proc your prowess guys. So it's not strictly better, but still, this is an uncounterable, you know, pump spell. That's kind of interesting. And later on in the game, you kind of don't mind paying. You do mind paying 6 mana, but let's say it's mono red. You're mono red aggro. You have just gotten swept. You've gotten swept twice. The game has gone on way longer than you could ever want it to go on. And suddenly, with 7 mana on the table, and you know the game has gone on 10 turns at this point because you've had to deal with 2 Doom Scarves. 7 mana on the table. You draw Ironhoof Boar. You pay your 6 mana. You swing in 5 haste and you win the game. It could work. I think this card is just on the edge, the bare edge of playability in mono red decks. I really do. If it were 5 mana, 5/4 trample haste, I think the card would actually be quite playable in mono red. As it stands, though, I don't think that it is, but I will still give this card like a 1.75. I honestly, I don't think this card is the worst card in the world. Call me a pig if you want to, but I think the card is actually better than it looks. Probably not standard playable, but better than it looks. Yeah, bad Rimrock Knight. Yeah, it's a bad Rimrock Knight, but Rimrock cannot attack for 5 haste. You know, but still, like Rimrock also couldn't block. You know, like this blocks like everything on the other side of the table. I don't know, guys. It's probably a worse Rimrock Knight, but still. As a comparison, could be worse. Also, the fact that the creature you're targeting gains trample, big deal. Huge deal. So, I don't know. There could be something to it. What up, Christmas? Good to see you in chat. Yes, the card could bring home the bacon. Yes, it could, Razvael. I'll give Razvael credit for that joke. Good job. Kami of Industry is up next. This is 5 mana for a 3/6. I don't care what the text box is, even though the text box is kind of cool. Still bad. No standard play on this. Priced way out. 1. Kami's Flare is up next. This is a removal spell that's kind of interesting. If you control a modified creature, this can hit one of your opponent's creatures and kill it, but also deal 2 damage to the the creature's controller. This, I think, is actually kind of standard playable. If there are enough red creatures that are modified, and I think there might be. If you can reliably hit this on turn 4, I don't think it has to be turn 2. If you have to use this as a removal spell on turn 2, you feel kind of bad because you didn't get the extra value. But you still played a removal spell on turn 2, got rid of your opponent's werewolf pack leader or whatever. You feel okay about that. But I think that on turn 4, when you're trying to set up an attack step in your mono red deck or something, or even just your burn deck, but you're trying to set up an attack step in your mono red deck, then you can remove a creature, get in with 2 or 3 guys, and you've dealt an extra 2. Like, it's good. Kami's Flare is a pretty good card. Yeah, Lightning Strike plus, Christmas says. I think that's good. Yeah, it's premium limited removal, but again, we're talking mostly about standard. You play the card every time in limited. In standard, I actually think there's an argument for this card, not only in, mono red aggro, but obviously a mono red burn deck, a thing that can kill your opponent's creatures and, shock your opponent. Kind of a dream for a burn deck. It doesn't see play in modern or anything, but in historic or standard, I could absolutely see this card seeing play. I'll give this card a 2.25. I think it's actually pretty good. Kindled Fury is up next. We've seen this card before. It never sees standard play. It's very bad. Even when there are like prowess decks in red-blue, they don't want Kindled Fury. It's not good. Don't play it. It's a 1. Kumano faces Kakazan. This is... I just love saying the name of the card. Kumano faces Kakazan is okay. There's a lot of discussion about this card. It's one of the more expensive uncommons in the set, too, right now. It was on the sleepers list until I realized it was too expensive and saw too much talk to be considered a sleeper. I think this card is probably good. You get to attack on turn 3 with your 2/2. The haste matters an awful lot here. This part of the text box, that exile stuff, really actually more impactful than you think it's going to be most of the time. I think that's going to come up a lot. I do. Also, an extra damage. Also, if you're on the draw, it can kill your opponent's 1-drop a lot of the time. Kill your opponent's Usher of the Fallen. Kill your opponent's Hot Shot Mechanic. That's kind of great, Really mitigates being on the draw against a mono white deck. That's good. This second mode, pretty cool. Whenever you cast your next creature spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And you're almost guaranteed to play a creature on turn 2 in your mono red deck, right? So I actually think this card is sweet. Deceptively very, very good, potentially. The problem is that you're not attacking with your 2 power guy on turn 1 or turn 2. And that's really what you want to be doing. Is attacking with a 2 power guy on turn 2. And this card doesn't let you do that. But it does fill your board. By turn 3, it gives you a haste 2/2 to swing with for just the 1 mana investment. It's free that turn. It does do some damage for you. It's not a total loss on turn 1. You're not missing your 1-drop. You're still dealing some damage on turn 1. It's like you played a Raging Goblin, And then the counter's ability is cool, but you might miss it. But if you miss the counter ability, then you're playing mono red aggro wrong. So, I don't know. Altogether, I think this is a pretty exciting card to play in those decks. And I'm going to give it a 2.25. I think it's really interesting. I do. Lizard Blades is up next. Everyone seems to love this card. It's just like the best fencing ace that we've ever seen, but even best fencing ace we've ever seen gets a 1.75. March of Reckless Joy is up next. Cool way to draw cards in red. Love that it's instant speed, by the way, but weird that it's instant speed too. It's in some ways, but at least it gives you till the end of your next turn, so you can draw to quote unquote draw 4 cards at the end of your opponent's turn, and then you have until the end of your next turn. You can untap, right? And have all your mana available to you to play the cards you've just quote-unquote drawn. So this is a cool card. Really cool card. And it's even decent at a low mana cost. You can play at the end of your opponent's turn for 3 mana, and you kind of play Divination at instant speed, a little bit. So I think the card is neat, and I'm just going to give it a 2.25. Somewhere in there. Again, niche playable. But in the decks that it is niche playable in, it might be a ridiculous pseudo refill. Again, in Burn, if it's turn 4 and you haven't finished the game yet, just pump all your mana into this, draw 3 cards at the end of your opponent's turn, and then, you get another crack at drawing a card on your turn. So, you kind of get to look at 4 cards over the course of a turn in that specific scenario. And you should be able to draw a couple of burn spells in those 4 cards. So, I don't know. It could be better than it looks. But Ogre Head Helm is next. This, again, it kind of reminds me of a Bomat Courier, but not a Bomat Courier. These kind of creatures in aggro decks that draw cards, like refill you when they get through, tend to be very good. However, it's just a 2-mana 2/2. And what's the likelihood this actually deals combat damage to a player? Usually the thing that you equip it to is more likely to deal combat damage to a player, but if you did that, you had to pay 3 mana to equip it, and 2 mana to play it in the first place. Is it worth 5 mana to do it? And then, I don't know. I don't know. I want to like this card. I really want to like this card, but this is one of those that I think is not as good as it looks. Not quite a trap, but not as good as it looks. So I'll just give this card a 2. Peerless Samurai is next. This is not great, although it is cost reduction, but it's still not. Don't be fooled. Cost reduction isn't always good enough. In this case, I really don't think that it is. So I'll just give this card a 1. Rabbit Battery is a sweet card. This is actually really cool. It's a Raging Goblin on turn 1. It's like the best Raging Goblin ever printed. Raging Goblin turn 1, and then every turn after that, it has the potential to give anything you cast for the rest of the game haste. That's really good. I like this against sweepers. If you're able to, swing 2 turns in a row with this in the early game, shock your opponent with it in terms of what damage it's done, and then equip it to your 4-drop to give or equip it to your 3-drop to give it haste or something like that on turn 4. And then your opponent sweeps you. You get Rabbit Battery back, which means you can either swing with a creature, even though you just got swept. You can swing with a 1/1, or if you have or draw another creature, you're likely to just after you get swept, you're on basically a naked board, play a creature, attach Rabbit Battery to it, and swing with a 3/3 or a 4/4. After you got swept. That seems good to me. Again, maybe a potential 4 of, or at least a 2 of in mono red. You have a total of 8 2-power 1-drops that you can play in a mono red deck. So I don't know how much this sees the cut, but usually you want to play 10 to 11 1-drops in mono red. So you still have room for this. Do you play Fireblade Charger instead? I don't know, right? So there's decisions to make, but I'll still give this card a 2.25. I think it's really interesting. We'll move on to Reinforced Ronin, which is one of the 1-mana 2-power dudes you might want to play in mono red. This is the haste guy. That's just a 1-mana 2-drop with haste. However, he channels to draw a card as well. Pops back to your hand every turn. So he's got the Viashino Sandstalker ability. He's kind of got dash, but you can't choose to not dash him. He comes back every hand. So he's really good against sorcery speed removal and sweepers and stuff. That's kind of cool. But when you reach a point in the game where he's no longer relevant at all, you can just discard him and draw a card. That's a lot of value. That's pretty good. The problem is a lot of mono red decks do want to play on curve. They don't want to spend an extra mana every turn. They really don't. So there's that. Imagine a start where you get 2 of these in your opening hand. You can play 1 on turn 1, swing 2, play 2 on turn 2, swing 4. But then, even though that's a really good start on the play, you put your opponent at 14 before they even played their second land. You don't really have anything to show for it. You don't really have anything on the table. It kind of feels bad when you're trying to snowball value, snowball damage in your mono red deck. So there are bad things about this card. There really are. But at the end of the day, I'll still give it a 2.5. I think the card is really good in terms of 1-mana 2-power dudes, especially for what we need 1-mana 2-power guys to do. This guy does them. So I really like it. It's got haste. Discards for a card when it stops being relevant. Card's good. 2.5. Scrap Welder is up next. I think this card is kind of bad. It has the potential to do very stupid things. Very stupid things. It gets in loops and it's fun and all that, but it is self-mitigating. The coolest thing about the card is that Big Hero 6 is right there on the card. I made a lot of comparisons. This is the thing from Fully Cooley, but that's the fun thing about the card is comparing that thing on the card to stuff in existing IP. But aside from that, there's probably fun loops you can get into. This is obviously good value, but you have to wait a turn before you can do anything with it. And even when you can do something with it, it brings back something less than the mana value of the thing you sacked. It's just, I don't know. I don't know how good I can actually call this card, but these cards tend to at least be halfway decent, so I'll give it a 1.75. Up next is Scrapyard Steelbreaker. This card is a really, really, really bad ATOG. Like just the worst ATOG you've ever seen. Get it out of here. 1. Seismic Wave is up next. This is the I'm a red spell that deals 2 damage to everything. Actually, it deals 2 damage to a target and then 1 damage to each non-artifact creature. Cool thing about this, you can take out a bunch of 1 toughness guys and a 3 toughness guy. That's actually, Seismic Wave isn't actually too bad, but I think with, oh my goodness, we've got Crush the Weak and Cinderclasm in the format right now. Those are probably just both better than this. So I don't think this sees too much play. I'll still give the card like a solid 1.75 though. These red sweepers are occasionally very good. Also, I do like that you can shock your opponent. You can deal 2 to the face and then 1 to everything they control. Could potentially be good in a burn deck. Probably not. For 3 mana, I hope you're doing something better, but if this does sweep your opponent, shock their head, they make Pikachu face, like that, I don't know, it could be good. Shattered States Era is next. This is the 5 mana saga that steals a thing and then gives all your guys +1/+0 and then becomes a 3/3 trample haste. Card's not playable. 5 mana is too much. 1. Simian Sling is next. This Monkey Ball guy. Why isn't this card super expensive? We'll talk about why I asked that question a little bit later. But this is just a 1 red mana for a 1/1 equipped creature gets 1/1. Whenever a equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals the damage to a defending player. Same thing with the monkey. Whenever monkey becomes blocked, it deals the damage to a player. People have talked about this card being good. It is not. Card gets a 1. So Kinzan Smelter is next. This is interesting too. This allows you to sack artifacts and create 3/1 hastes, which is neat. You can only do it once. Like you can't sacrifice 4 artifacts and make 4 3/1. That would be too good. They don't want you to have fun with your magic cards. So I'm just going to give this like a 1.25. I don't think it's playable. Tempered in Solitude is next. This is an interesting little 2 mana draw cards enchantment thing, sort of, kind of. And luckily they didn't make it whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks. Just a creature you control attacks alone. I think this is cool and may potentially go in some commander decks. But as far as standard goes, 1.25. It's not good. Thundering Raiju is one of my sleepers, I think, in this set. Raiju is I always call it Raichu, which I will continue to do. Raichu is 4 mana for a 3/3 haste. Whenever it attacks, a thing you control gets a +1/+1 counter, and then Raichu deals X damage equal to the number of modifies guys you control. This is actually very sweet. This almost always does something. This could come down as a 4/4 attacker that does at least 1 damage. So, like, it's kind of, 5 damage for haste. That's actually 5 damage on a haste guy for 4 mana. That's kind of good. It could potentially be very good in a mono red deck. I like this more than a lot of the 4 drops we have access to. This can always be a 4/4, but it doesn't have to be. You can put a +1/+1 counter on something else, which is kind of an interesting little wrinkle. And then if you have 2 other modified guys, let's say you have 2 modified guys before you play this. You spent the whole game playing modified guys. You play this, you modify it. It bolts something. It swings for like 7 damage. Also, like, I don't know, guys. The haste really sells this card for me. If it didn't have haste, I would think this card would be like just total and complete doo-doo. But the fact that it has haste and works on an empty board is good. It's good enough on an empty board. But on a not empty board with like 1 or 2 other modified guys, it suddenly becomes really good. I think this card could be actually kind of fantastic. I really do. Yeah, it sucks it's not a dragon, but I still take it. I'm going to give this card like a 2.5. And I know that sounds high, but I also don't care. Let's look at Tawashi Song Shaper next. This card is a DJ. You either think that's cool or super cringe, and I can't control that. But one way or the other, this could be neat. 2 mana, 2/2. Whenever another artifact enters under your control, it gets +1/+0. So if you have a way to make a ton of little artifact tokens all on the same turn at a ridiculous mana value, suddenly this swings for 8. But it's probably still not good because it has no evasion and no way to survive the combat step. So it's probably not as good as I want it to be, but it's still a cool card. I'll just give it a 1.25. Twin Shot Sniper. Really, really neat. Really neat card. Fixed Bone Crusher Giant. without a very good body, but it makes up for not having a good body by just, if you pay the 4 mana, you get everything. You get the body and 2 damage to a target. I like this. I don't think it sees much standard play. I really don't. I think the body is a little bit too small. However, uncounterable 2 damage to a target. Interesting on turn 2. Pretty decent removal spell on turn 2. We've already seen Stomp. Just people have already forgotten how good Stomp is. Stomp is good. This Stomp is uncounterable. That's pretty good. And the fact that if you get it late, this can be a blocker. I think most of the time it's going to be a blocker that either kills a guy or hits the opponent for 2 damage. Sometimes it'll finish the game. If it's going to finish the game, you want to channel it so it's uncounterable, right? But one way or the other, I think this is another one of those cards that's just like super almost there. It's just like the boar we looked at earlier. This card is almost there. Like Princess Tiana. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. It's the best song in that movie. It's a really good song. But it's not quite, right? So I'm going to give this card like a 2. I think that it's somewhat playable, but it has to get there, and I'm not sure that it will. Unstoppable Ogre is next. Card's not good, it's a 1. Upriser Renegade, I'll have to give a 1 for this as well. Even though it could get to like a 5-power 2-drop. It could easily get to a 5-power 2-drop, but there's a lot of enabling to get that to work. It's probably not going to be a 5-power 2-drop on turn 3 when you attack, although it's possible. It is possible. I just don't think the card's very good, despite the amazing haircut, despite the Johnny Bravo Lupin III sort of crossover that it's giving me. I still not really a fan. I'm going to give the card a 1.5. Because, 5-power 2-drops are good, but, you have to do a lot of work. Voltage Surge is the last card, though. This is just 1 red mana for a sort of magma spray type thing. Kind of a shock that can't hit face. But if you sack an artifact, it does 4 damage. I want this to be Shrapnel Blast. I want to be able to hit my opponent's head with this. And if you could, it'd be one of the best cards in the set. But you can't. So it's just a serviceable removal spell. Red does need ways to deal 4 damage to things in this specific environment right now. So it's not a bad card, but still, decent removal for red. 2.25. Azusa's Many Journeys is our first green card. This is the last solid color that we'll be going through. So let me take a quick break, take a sip, and get going. Yeah, truly stoppable ogre. Instead of unstoppable ogre. Just stoppable ogre. But I can't go down yet. I have to look at Many Journeys first. Azusa's Many Journeys is 2 mana, 1 and a green. And on the first one, you get an extra land if you have it in your hand. The second chapter, you get a 3 life. And then you get a 3/3 that may untap lands. Possibly. I think this card is probably bad. Now, I do think that if you can get, on turn 2, an extra land off of this, that makes the card. That's what makes if you can turn this into a rampant growth, it's a good Magic card. It's also semi-decent in landfall decks, but you don't have anything on like turn 1 that activates landfall. So on curve, that's almost never going to be good. A 2 mana thing that becomes a 3/3 on turn 4? Second, third, on turn 4 you get a 3/3 that can untap stuff. I keep saying this. I think that I and the rest of the community may be judging these sagas too harshly, because who knows? A saga that becomes a creature rather than just going to the graveyard is good. But a lot of people have been saying like, oh, this is a saga that gives you everything a saga gives you, and it gives you a creature. Not really, because they've replaced the 3rd chapter with a creature. Usually the 3rd chapter is one of the best parts of a saga, or it can be. In this case, rather than giving you some bomb ability on chapter 3, you just get kind of a okay creature, But again, this could be a turn 4 3/3 that you don't pay any mana for, and that's good. That's pretty good. Like, you have all your mana untapped. You can play another creature, but you also get like kind of a free 3/3. This ramps you on turn 2. On the second turn it's in play, it gains 3, which is not nothing. Like in your ramp deck, gaining 3 is pretty good on chapter 2. That's not bad. It almost like fogs an opponent. You know, it kind of negates an early combat step, gaining 3 life. So, like, I kind of like this card. I kind of do, but I don't want to rate it too highly either. I will actually give this card a 2, reminding you that 2 is a decent score. But I should rate it higher than that. You have to have the additional land. If you have this in your opening hand, and you only have 2 lands, and you draw this, you know, it's going to feel bad. You not only need the 3rd land, you kind of need a 4th land. Right? Like, I want to play an additional land on turn 2, but I also want a land drop on turn 3. So you have to have a bunch of lands in there. I don't know. I still want to give it a solid 2, though. I think the card is pretty good. I do. But Bamboo Grove Archer is up next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 3/3 Defender Reach. The cool thing is you can channel it to Plummet. Still pretty bad in Standard. The Plummet mode costs too much. The creature mode is not good because it has Defender, right? So let's just give it a 1. Bearer of Memory is up next. 3 mana for a 3/2 that costs 6 mana to put counters on enchantment creatures and make them gain trample. Did you guys know that this card is actually one of the more expensive commons in the set? I was looking through all the prices, and pre-order price is always weird, but this is almost $1. This is like 99 cents for this card. It makes absolutely no sense. It's not a good card. It does look like Dame Judi Dench if you look hard enough at it, but it's still not a very good card. Blossom Prancer is up next. I've talked about liking this card in the past, but I think we are past the kind of Standard environment where this is a playable card. 5 or 6 years ago, I think this would have been plenty of value. A 4 mana or a 5 mana 4/4 reach that replaces itself with something good. If it doesn't replace itself, it gains 4 life. I actually like a lot about this card, especially in Limited, but in Standard, this will see basically no play forever. But I'll still get the card at 1.25. I like it. Buna Beside You is next, or Beside You. Not good. It looks like it could potentially be a good card. Don't fall for it. It's not good. It's not a very good card. It's not a good... Snot. It's not a good card. Buna Beside You. I'll give it a 1. Beside You reaches skyward. So this is an interesting one, but it costs way too much mana. It's a 4 mana saga that puts 2 lands into your hand, and then you put a land card from your graveyard on top of your library, and then you get a Renin 7 token, right? So this is interesting, but for 4 mana, I don't think this is playable. 1.25. Careful Cultivation, one of my favorite cards in the whole set. I really like this. I do not care about the aura mode on this. I guess it could technically be playable in some situations. It's there, so it's relevant. That's a mantra of mine. It's a line of text on the card. It's there, so it's relevant. But the more relevant thing about this is that this is a 2 mana dork that's uncounterable and has flash. An uncounterable flash mana dork for only 2 mana. This could technically be one of the strongest cards in the set. But again, only as a role player. Never the strongest card in the deck that it's in, right? Always a bridesmaid. But I still think one of the most playable cards in Standard that could see play in multiple decks. It really could. We're seeing a sort of flash ramp deck, an instant speed ramp deck coming along. You know, like that Mirror Shelled Crab. That's a ramp payoff, but it's also a counterspell. This is a ramper that you can play at instant speed. We'll see a creature in gold earlier that's also a ramp payoff that does instant speed things. So I like the idea of that deck, but I think that even outside of the sort of Simic or Blue-Green X ramp deck, this could do a lot of work, right? So like a Blue-Green Tempo deck, this does a little bit of work. Just we've never really seen an uncounterable flash mana dork before. It's only a 1/1. It only makes green. In terms of raw power, it's not the best mana dork in the world once it's on the table, but it gets on the table. And it can do so at the end of your opponent's turn. You can also just flash it in to block. If that's what you want, you just flash it in to block a guy. Like it's also got that sort of secret hidden mode on the card. There's a lot of cool things about this thing. So like, I'm going to give this like a 3. I'm serious. This is one of the better cards to my mind in the set. I'll give it a 3. Coiling Stalker is up next, though. This is not as good. I'll just give this a 1. You don't see a whole lot of green ninjutsu, and this is there, so that's cool, but I still don't love it. It can, 1 by 1, like, modify your whole team, and that's neat, but it's not great. Commune with Spirits is up next. I'll give this a 2. I think Commune is actually kind of cool. We haven't seen this for enchantments. too much. And at the very least, if it whiffs on an enchantment, you get a land most of the time. And some of the time, these can be worth like taking out a land or two and just putting like 2 copies of these in your deck. Because, you know, again, very least, it's going to get you a land most of the time. Right? So, I don't know. I like these. Good card selection. Decent in enchantment decks. So, no, that's fine. Dragon Kami Reborn. Hold on. Let me go up. Is the Dragon Kami Reborn a decent Magic card? Maybe. It takes a good bit of enabling. But in the meantime, it gains you 4 life. So, like, it gives you the breathing room that you need to do cool stuff with it, right? You get your egg, and then when the egg dies, you can reanimate some... Well, not reanimate. You can, like, get one of these things that you exiled for free. Just play it. It could be so sick. This card could be super sick, and they've mitigated the fact that it's a 3-mana do-nothing by making it do something. Thank you, Wizards. It's a 3-mana card that gives you 4 life in the early to mid-game. So, again, you're able to survive to do your cool stuff with this card. I just don't hate this, but I still don't think it's super playable. It's kind of awkward. 3 mana is probably too much. It's just, let's be realistic. You're getting Spike Dev tonight. The card is probably a 1.75. Fade into Antiquities next. Just baseline artifact or enchantment removal, at least at exiles, but at sorcery speed. Kind of a crap card, 1.25. Fang of Shigeki next. Your 1 mana Death Touch, 1/1 of the format or of the set. These are always going to be 1s, but they're actually somewhat playable in some decks. But it's still, these are always going to be 1s. Favor of Jukai. This one channels for 2 mana, and a creature gets +3/+3 and reach till end of turn. The problem is, this one is not as good as, like, you know, the Boar in red that does that channels for +3/+3. Really, the Boar channels for +3/+1 and trample. +3/+3 and reach is, in most cases, in an aggressive deck, going to actually be worse. Your creature may survive, but trample is really... I'm talking about, again, standard here. Your creature is going to survive more often, but a lot of times I just want to get damage through in my aggressive deck. Trample is going to be better for doing that. The fact this is on Aura, just the Aura part of it's bad. You know, just altogether, I give the card like a 1.25. I don't think it's very good. Generous Visitor is one of my favorite uncommons in the set. Maybe one of my favorite green cards, all totaled. I think this card is sweet and potentially playable, especially in older formats that have a lot of good options for 1 mana enchantments. You play this on turn 1, 2 1-mana enchantments on 2, get through. Play at least 1 enchantment on 3, if not 2 enchantments on 3, get through for like 5. Like, it could happen. It could easily happen. And again, I think in those older formats, card is even better. But is it good? Who knows? This is my kind of Magic card, though. So I'm going to give it a 2. And it could actually be higher than a 2. This could be a really good card. Geothermal Kami. I can't do it. Geothermal Kami is next. This card is bad. It is. You might be tempted to think this has decent stats. 4 mana for 4/3 that sort of gives you a form of card advantage. No, it's bad. It's not good. Go Shintai, the green shrine, the most expensive shrine in the set. You know why? It costs 2 mana. That's why. Not a whole lot of shrines cost 2 mana. This is the other 2-drop in your shrines deck in Historic. You need 2-drops. This card is in very high demand. However, it's probably the worst shrine in terms of function in the whole set. But it's still a shrine, and you can like put counters on this, and then it tramples through for like 1 million eventually. Like, I don't know. It's kind of decent, but you'll play it one way or the other because it's 2 mana. I'll give it a 2. Grafted Growth is next. Card is not great, but it does do a couple of things. It's not only ramp. 3 mana ramp, like we've seen, can be playable from format to format, depending. But it also makes a thing bigger, which is not bad. It's really not a bad card, guys. I'll give it a 1.5. Greater Tanuki is up next. This channels to ramp, but it's also a huge guy. Like I was saying earlier, instant speed like ramp deck, right? Like a flash ramp Simic deck that can play counter spells, but also plays its ramp at instant speed. You got your 2-drop ramp at instant speed. We just looked at it. Now you got your 3-drop ramp at instant speed. That's also stapled to a very large creature that can trample. So deck is coming together, and it might be okay. You know, I will say, just 3 mana instant speed, go get a basic, hasn't been playable in the past because we actually, one of the omens, the green omen, was instant speed, go get a land. And that didn't see play. But I still think that given the right format, the right deck, the right amount of cards for that deck, there really weren't other cards for the omen of the whatever, the green omen deck. There weren't enough cards for there to be a flash ramp deck. This time, we're seeing a critical mass of cards that can form this flash ramp deck. So we might see it. We might see it. I like this card. I'll give it a 1.75. Close to a 2, but not quite. Harmonious Emergence is next. This is bad. I don't like this card. People tend to like this one. I don't. This is the 4-mana thing that makes a land a 4/5. And if the land would die, you sacrifice this and the land gets indestructible. So I get why people like it. Still don't love it. Why would you put this in your... This takes up a slot in your deck. Don't do that. 1. Heir of the Ancient Fang is next. 3 mana for a 2/3. And when it enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter. You have a modified guy. So it's 3 mana 3/4, and that's about as exciting as it gets. Card is pretty boring. Let's give it a 1. Historian's Wisdom is up next. I've heard a lot of talk about this card, but when it comes right down to it, I'm going to give this card a 1.25. I actually don't think this is very good. Despite the draw card mode on it, I don't think it's very good. Invoke the Ancients is next, the last in the Invoke cycle. I'm going to give this card... I'm going to give this card a 2.75. This card is very hard to cast, but I think that if Mono Green plays a 5-drop, it's probably this. You could say they would play Froghemoth over this, but they haven't been. They've been playing Wrenn and 7. To me, Mono Green is the kind of deck that needs to get in damage as quickly as possible to win the game, so they might not play 5-drops at all, and many Mono Green decks don't. As the format shifts into a more mid-rangey kind of format, which is already done. It's already done after these bans. But may do even more when we get all these cards that are really good mid-rangey cards. A lot of these cards are mid-rangey. And this is one of them. As the format shifts to those cards, we may see Mono Green play more 5-drops. Question is, if Mono Green wants to have some sort of go-long tool against a mid-range deck, if it wants to have a mid-range tool of its own to sort of stand up to mid-range decks, not get blown out so hard. Does it play Wrenn and 7 or does it play this card? Or does it play Froghemoth? You know, if Mono Green's trying to go as fast as possible, you would say Froghemoth. But if Mono Green's trying to go as fast as possible, they just don't play 5-drops. So I think that leaves us with Invoke and Wrenn and 7. And I think Wrenn and 7 is the better card. But when we're talking about when I play my 5-drop, I want it to bury my opponent on the next turn. I want playing my 5-drop to mean my opponent loses guaranteed on the next turn. I think this does that better than a Wrenn and 7. Wrenn and 7 on turn 5 in your Mono Green deck is never going to create 8 power worth of stats on 2 guys. It might create 5 worth of power on 1 guy, right? But this creates 8 power and stats on 2 dudes, and they both have abilities. That's probably, if you're playing 5-drops in your Mono Green deck, that's probably better than a Wrenn and 7 on curve. So it's kind of hard to say, but I still want to give the card like a 2.5 or a 2.75. I do, you know. But we'll move on to Yugon Defends the Temple. This is 3 mana for a Mythic Saga that gives you a monk dude that taps for green, gives you a mana dork the turn you play it. Then you get +1/+1 counters on guys. And then you get a 2/2 with all of this text. All of this text. A 2/2 flyer. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on that creature. As long as you control 5 or more modified guys, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. So like you could look at this as a 3 mana 7/7 trample. Flying trample, a flample for that matter. But it's going to be really hard to get a bunch of modified guys. This takes a million turns, you know. This helps you modify 2 guys. This helps you ramp to where you can like use the X ability a little bit more easily. I don't know. Maybe it's better than it looks. But 3 mana startup cost for not a whole lot of gravy for a while. I don't know. If it flips and immediately is a 7/7 flample, like let's go. But even then it can't attack that turn. It has to wait a turn. I want to like this. This is one of those I really want to like. But I just don't that much. So I'll give this card a 2.25. But maybe, just maybe, it's very, very sick. Jukai Preserver is next. This channels to put +1/+1 counters on stuff. In the meantime, it's a Hill Giant. That also puts a +1, like it could be just a 4 mana 4/4. So in limited, this is probably fine. In standard, 1.25. Not a good card. You won't play it. Jukai Trainee is a 2-mana 2/2. When it blocks, becomes blocked. It gets boring until end of turn, so you don't play it. It's a 1. Kami of Transience over here. One of my favorite creatures in this whole set, but how good is it actually in Standard? I do think they juiced it. They pushed the Enchantress payoff in this set quite a bit. My only gripe is that it's not an enchantment creature itself. But that may have been too much. Either way, I think Kami is really sweet, but I can't give it too high of a score because I don't think it's going to be, you know, a world-ending, meta-shifting creature or anything. So I'm just going to give it like a 2.5. I think it's a sweet creature. Kappa Wrecker, or Leonardo over here. Sweet creature, probably just sees combat or sideboard play, though, in best of 3. And that's about it. It might see play in Fin decks as well, but for the most part, sideboard card, best of 3. We'll give it a 2. Kadama of the West Tree up next. I don't think this card is very good. I know a lot of people do. I am not actually very high on it. I think the hoops you have to jump through it are too many and too high. So I'm just going to give this card a 1.75 and feel your wrath. Let's move on to Kira the Boundless Sky. This is 5 mana. For a 4/4 flying Death Touch. That's the thing, is this one is smaller than a lot of the other dragons for its mana cost, but it does have the Death Touch, so it trades with anything. It goes in your Fin deck as well. And then when it dies, you can either put 3 lands in your hand or you get an XX. And the XX is equal to the number of lands you control, right? So again, you get a Wrenn and 7 token, kind of, when it dies. And I actually like that. When it dies, if it's even been in play like a turn, you'll likely get a creature with higher power toughness than it. Which is kind of good. Gives your opponent incentive to not kill it. However, you can send it through Flying Death Touch. If your opponent can't block it, they take 4 a turn. They can block it. It kills whatever they block it with. Doesn't matter if they have a 5/5 flyer. Still kills whatever they block it with and replaces itself with something very likely bigger than it. So, that is kind of... It has the potential to result in really crazy play patterns is all I'm going to say. But I still don't think that it's really that good. End of the day, I don't think this card is amazing. But I do think you basically always want to be attacking with it. Like, it doesn't matter. The only thing I wouldn't attack into with this is a Voice of the Blessed that has enough counters to have flying and indestructible. It's like the only thing in the entire format I would not attack into with Akira. So unless they've somehow given a 4-power flying guy first strike, but still, there's always an exception. But still, Kira's pretty good, and I'll actually give this card like a 2. You know, could be better, could be worse. March of Burgeoning Life. This has the potential to be one of the most busted cards in the set, but it is probably not. It's probably just okay. Now, you have to have a creature that you would like to basically copy, so you already have to have a decent creature out. That mitigates how good this card actually is, but there are plenty of creatures that work well in multiples or even combo with each other in multiples. So, you know, there's probably a stupid combo deck out there somewhere in some format, even if it's not standard, that wants to play this card and can actually take advantage of the cost reduction more on this card than it can with sort of other things. Than other marches can, is what I meant to say. So I don't know. I kind of like this card, but there are some hoops and all that. It's probably not really good till later on in the game. Like, you know, you play this on turn 2 and go get another copy of her 1-drop. How good is that really? If it is good, card's probably good. but for the most part, the card's probably not that great. I'm just going to give it like a 2.5 because, again, it's got busted potential. A lot of busted potential. But even in the combo decks that it's in, it's a very important card, but it's not even really the card that wins the game. You know, so 2.5, playable card. Master's Rebuke is up next. This is just a bite effect at instant speed for 2 mana. So it's actually not bad. We've already seen some things better than it in Magic history, but Ram Through was a better card than this. But Ram Through saw tons of play. This probably won't, however. So at the end of it all, dust settles, smoke clears. Let's give it a 1.75. Possible playable removal in limited. Or even in standard in your green deck. But, you know, we have Blizzard Brawl right now. This isn't replacing Blizzard Brawl like ever, so... Well, after Blizzard Brawl rotates, maybe this is what mono green plays. But moving on to Orochi Merge Keeper. This taps for a green, but can tap for 2 green. There's the rub. Everyone's excited about it because it can tap for 2 green. But you have to modify it some way. And I don't know how many ways there are to modify it that I really want to include in my Magic the Gathering deck. So if you get this tapping for 2 mana on turn 3, I think you're doing pretty good. I think you're doing okay, but are you doing good enough? Again, the card is just still kind of a role player. So I want to give this a solid 2, but that's a very solid 2. Roaring Earth is up next. A lot of people like this card too. This is 2 mana for a landfall thing. Whenever you landfall, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature or vehicle, but you can also discard it to put X counters on a land you control, and that land can swing in. I do think this card is interesting, has a lot of like sort of versatility and all that. I do like the landfall on a 2-drop, that's always cool. But at the same time, is the card actually good? Is it worth your 2 mana investment on turn 2? Is it worth your million mana investment late in the game to maybe get in with a 6 power land or something and win? I don't know if either mode is actually as powerful as we want it to be on this card. I do think the card is cool. I think the card is niche playable in a couple of decks, like the green-white creature lands deck. That's kind of a thing on Arena right now. I think this card belongs in that deck. But again, is it good? Is it niche playable outside of a niche deck? That's the kind of card that's probably a 1.75. So we'll move on to Season of Renewal. This is interesting because it could be instant speed card advantage in green. This could get you 2 cards for 1 card at instant speed, and that sounds good. But barring exactly the right kind of green control-based deck, maybe a Sultai deck that wants 1 copy of this, and even then, that's the only deck this card is in. So again, niche playable in a niche deck that doesn't even exist yet. So I can't really rate the card too highly. But again, I'll give the card a solid 2. Card advantage out of your graveyard at instant speed could potentially be very, very good. We'll move on to Shigeki. I talked myself into this card on stream last time, and I still feel the same way I did. I think this card is better than it looks. Very easy to think this card actually isn't great. But as an instant speed regrowth effect, that can get you 1 or 2 cards at a pretty steep cost, but it can get you a couple of cards at instant speed. In, again, your Sultai deck, your Bant deck, whatever. Just the channel function of the card is okay. But the creature half of the card is pretty good too, right? A 2 mana 1/3 blocks okay. And on blocks, you can return it to its owner's hand and ramp. You might whiff. The worst part is when you whiff. You can whiff. Warning, it's possible, but just blocking with this, returning it to your hand, and potentially ramping, I think is going to be a pretty good function of the card a lot of the time too. So I like this. It kind of reminds me of Sakura Tribe Elder that also can, at instant speed, get a bunch of cards back from your graveyard. If you're in a ramp deck, there's a potential for this to get like 3 cards back from your graveyard at one time. I don't know. I think the card is actually quite good, and I'm going to give it a 2.75. I think it's formidable. Spinning Wheel Kick is bad. I'm going to give the card a 1.25. It's the removal spell that's a bite that can hit multiple creatures, but it's still, bad. It's still so bad. 4 mana to hit 1. Yeah. What is it? 4 mana to hit 1 creature. 6 mana to hit 2 creatures. 8 mana for 3. It's not good. Spring Leaf Avenger. Now, this, I don't think is better in the 4-drop slot than a Seeker's Chariot or an Ulvenwald Oddity. However, I still keep coming back to this card over the last few days. When I look through the set, this card always catches my eye. If you want value in your mid-range deck, if you're playing green-white or green-black or something like that, just a mid-range deck with creatures in it. I don't think this goes in like an aggro deck or something like that. It costs too much. Even at a 4 mana investment, I think that's a little much. I will, again, let me go back to that. In an aggro deck, this is technically probably better on turn 4 than an Asika's Chariot. Like in mono green, right? Mono green loves Asika's Chariot. It does so much with Asika's Chariot. So maybe this isn't the right example, but still. This does more damage than an Asika's Chariot on turn 4. Does it not? This does more damage than a Chariot on turn 4. And maybe we're looking at a mono green deck that wants to do a bunch of damage. I will say, one thing I like about this card is that it is 6 surprise damage. That's a lot. Now, you are returning something to your hand, so your opponent probably expected to take 2 to 3 damage, all right, by leaving a creature unblocked. They probably expected to take some damage, but you're at least doubling, if not tripling, that damage. You're dealing 6. That's a chunk. That's almost 3, one-third of their life total in one shot. You're dealing 6 surprise damage to them and getting card advantage. That might actually be pretty good. And then it threatens on subsequent turns to continue doing that. So, and your opponent has to block it, but if they block it, they probably just lose a creature to it. Your opponent probably doesn't have a whole lot of 6/5s, So they block it, they lose a creature to it, they let it through, you get card advantage. Any turn after the first turn you play it, you'll have all your mana open when you hit with this, so they really can't let you dig around in your graveyard. When you have all your mana open, So, I don't know, this card might actually be kind of really good. This card might actually be pretty good. And yeah, that's, somebody just pointed out you can channel stuff. You channel stuff in the early game, and then return it to your hand with a Springleaf Avenger when it ninjutsu's in. I don't know. There are things you could do with this. I think it's a really cool card. I don't think it's better than a lot of things Mono Green is doing at 4 and 5 mana, and that might ultimately doom the card, and that would be really sad, because I think this is actually kind of a playable Magic card. I really do. It has 6 power and ninjutsu's in for 4. What do you want? And you get your card advantage. I'm going to keep talking about the card forever, I guess. I need to move on to keep our speed run intact. But one way or the other, I think this is potentially like a 2.5. I really do. I think it's a good card. Story Weave is up next. I hate this card. I don't know why. I shouldn't. I know it's instant speed, combat trick that leaves the creature huge forever, or cool stuff to do with the lore counter on sagas. And I like cards that manipulate sagas. We don't have enough of those. Cool card. For some reason, I don't like it enough. The card's a 1. It's not playable in Standard. Tales of Master Shishiro is next. 5 mana saga that puts counters on stuff and then becomes a 5/5 with haste. Still not playable. 1 mana. It's priced way too far out. Tamio's Safekeeping. Is this better than Snakeskin Veil? No. So it probably won't see play, but it's still a powerful card in a vacuum. I'm going to give this a 2.25. Very powerful card. Teachings of the Kirin. This is not super great, but it is rare. Note that. This is 2 mana, mill 3 cards on Chapter 1 and get a 1/1. Put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control on Chapter 2, and you get a 1/1 that makes more 1/1s. I don't think this card is playable. I really don't, but I am going to give it a 1.5 just in case I'm wrong. Just in case I'm wrong. It's a 2 mana thing to get you 2 1/1 bodies. Could be worse. But let's move on to Weaver of Harmony. This is the enchantment enabler thing in the format. 2 mana, 2/2, other enchantment creatures you control get +1/+1. Pay mana, tap it, copy activated or triggered abilities from enchantments. That's neat. You can also note that you can copy them from a source that your opponent controls. If you want, in Commander, you can copy like someone else's enchantment thing and choose new targets for the copy. That's neat. Even in Standard, you can like copy an opponent's teleportation circle trigger and like do it to one of your guys. I don't know. It could be neat. It could be neat. But one way or the other, I don't think this card is actually super standard playable, but it is an Anthem effect, and it's only 1 mana to use its ability. It's pretty cheap to get in play in the first place. It's like not priced out of any playability, so maybe it's better than I think it is. I'll leave it at a 2, though. I'll leave it at a 2. Again, you might think that's a harsh score. It's not. That's somewhat playable. But last green card is Web Spinner Cuff. As cool as a spider bracelet is, the card gets a 1. It is not a good card. So let's move on to gold. Let's take a quick sip of our drink and get to the gold cards. Then we get to the artifacts, lands, finish this thing up. I imagine gold artifacts and lands are going to be about as much as one color. So we're bringing it home soon, guys. Let's look at Asari Captain, the 5 mana 4/3 haste that bigifies stuff when it attacks alone. Not a good card in Standard. There's way better stuff you could be doing for 5 mana. That's a 1.25 if I've ever seen one. Colossal Sky Turtle is maybe my favorite gold card in the entire set. I love this card like so much. 7 mana 6/5 flying ward 2. But you can also, at instant speed, have an uncounterable instant recover, get something out of your graveyard for 3 mana. Or an uncounterable instant speed bounce on a creature. I think this is subtly one of the best cards in the set. Really, I think I said this before. The way I look at this, if this was just a split card, instant speed, uncounterable, recover, or instant speed, uncounterable, bounce, that would probably be a playable Magic card in Sultai or Bant Control or something. But in this case, we've also stapled a hard-to-kill 6-power flyer to it, which is relevant a non-zero amount of the time. This card can win a game for you. It really can. I think this card is like one of the best cards in the set. I really do. Like, no joke. I'm kind of dying on this hill here. This is a card a lot of people are sort of arguing about on Spikes and on the MTG subreddit. I honestly, I think this card is like a 3.5. Like, it's I believe that's the second highest score I've passed out to a card tonight. But yeah, you can bounce something in the early game or during combat or whatever. You can later on in the game return a very important planeswalker or creature or something. Just in the guys, later on in the game, you can just pay 3 mana at instant speed to return a counter spell to your hand and then counter something. Like, oh, this at instant speed while your opponent has something on the stack. This card does that. You can, later on in the game return a Behold the Multiverse to your hand and just play it. Same turn, instant speed, end of your opponent's turn, draw 2. Scry 2, draw 2. There are all kinds of things just an instant speed restock can do for a control deck, but this is also a pseudo removal or tempo piece for those same control decks. And late in the game, when you rip it off the top of your library, 6/5 flying ward guy that wins the game, right? Possibly. Or you can reanimate it out of your graveyard, right? It's a ramp payoff, 7 mana for a 6/5 flying ward. I'm just saying, I think people too are discounting the ward on this. People are forgetting how good an ability ward is. Now, I will say, ward isn't as good on a 7-drop, because by the time you get it in play, your opponent can pay for the ward, but they still have to pay for the ward. They're not like double spelling on their turn, killing this thing, It's not a Hullbreaker Horror. It's not. 7 mana is a lot for the creature half of this, but what you're paying for is the versatility. You're paying for a thing that can be a creature. And the thing is, it's in a control deck, right? You're playing this in a control deck. So you control the board state, you Doomscar, you counterspell that thing, you have control of the game state. At which point, playing this can legitimately win the game. It really can. Like as the creature half of it. However, if you need to get some breathing room, bounce a guy. If you need to restock something important and play it so you can then take control of the game state, the card does that too. I think the card just literally does everything. And if the card was printed at Mythic, I would not have been surprised. I really think this is one of the best cards in the set. 3.5. 3.5, dude. Like, it's really good. Does anybody remember Simic Sky Swallower? It's comparable to Sky Swallower. It really doesn't have hexproof, but it has the next best thing. But we'll move on. We can't talk about that card all night. To Iganja. By the way, I get to say one more thing about it. In the Flash Ramp deck that I keep bringing up as a thing that I want to build in this video, this right here. This isn't the Flash Ramp deck. I mean, it doesn't ramp, but it is. It has 2 flash modes on it. And it's just this huge ramp payoff in the late game. I like this card, guys. You're not going to back me off of Sky Turtle. I love the card. Iganjo Uprising I don't think is very good. I just hate cards like this. It's going to make a bunch of dudes for you, but there's also something really cute about it. It gives your opponents guys. And, if you want, you can attack with haste, and your guys have menace, right? So your guys have menace. So, you're kind of getting through you're getting through all the guys that you made with the card, so it's a blah, blah, blah. You can justify it any way you want to. I'd rather just play Fireball than a card like this, like 9 times out of 10. The card's bad. 1. Bulk rare, no play. Enthusiastic, and yes, I know it procs your Prosperous Innkeeper like 7 times. I don't care. Card is bad. Don't fall for traps like this. Enthusiastic Mechanaut is up next. I will give this card like a straight up 2.25. Like, it's pretty good. Only good in artifact decks, but still very good in artifact decks. Gloom Shrieker, the fixed Eternal Witness. I have to give this a 2. Really decent in these like Golgari mid-range decks. That's probably the only place it really sees play. And at this point, I don't know if I want to play a 3-mana 2/1 Menace. we mostly play on curve in standard at this point. Even in mid-range decks that do play on curve, is Eternal Witness, that's like a strictly worse Eternal Witness, a playable card? I don't know if it is anymore. On turn 7, this is great. It still gives you a body. It still gives you a card. It's still fine, but it's not E-Witness. Don't look at it like it's Eternal Witness. It's not. But one way or the other, it's a body that's really fun to blink and do cool stuff with. If there's a deck out there that abuses this just right, it's a great card. But I'm still only going to give it like a 2 or a 2.25. I think it's in that range somewhere. Let's move on to Greasefang, Okiba Boss. Subtly, one of my favorite cards in the set, just in terms of flavor. We've got our biker mice from Mars, and he's the boss. Greasefang, which is a great name too, Greasefang. And also, I love that he's a boss, and that he has to do with this is a deep cut here, and it's gonna hurt my speed run, but it reminds me of Jimmy Witchert, a character from King of the Hill who runs the racetrack. And this guy, he runs the racetrack, and he's a boss. Jimmy Witchert, in case you don't know your King of the Hill, his catchphrase is, "I'm the boss." so I'm just gonna call this guy Jimmy from now on. I like Greasefang in terms of pure flavor and the things that it makes me think of. But it's also an Orzhov legend, so I have to like it. It's 3 mana for a 4/3 legendary rat pilot. Rat's incredible. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you return a vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That vehicle gains haste, and then you bounce the vehicle at the beginning of your next end step. I haven't read all these cards, but I read this one in specific to just really hammer home how powerful this card could be. It's a 3 mana 4-power guy. Not terrible stats. Those aren't bad stats. 3 mana 4-power dude that just allows you to reanimate vehicles. Reanimate vehicles. Okay, and imagine too, in an Abzan vehicles deck, you reanimate an Asika's Chariot. You reanimate Asika's Chariot. You can use this to crew your Asika's Chariot if you want to. You can use the cats if you want to as well, because the Asika's Chariot gains haste. So like you tap the cats, it gains haste, swings 4, bounces back to your hand, and when you play it again next turn, you get 2 more cats. Like that's so, the value with this in Chariot is just ridiculous if you can get it to work. But of course, you have to dump a Chariot into your graveyard. But you don't. You just play Greasefang into Chariot. Just do that. And then if your opponent kills your Chariot, you can use your Greasefang to get your Chariot back, get more cats, pops back to your hand, play it again, get more cats. It's just a disgusting card with Chariot, but it's good in vehicles decks, period. And I think if there are commander decks that want to play vehicles, and it looks like they're trying to do it, give us enough critical mass of decent playable vehicles, cards that work with vehicles. This new ability some creatures have to accrue vehicles as though their power were greater. All of this is kind of fumbling. All this is funneling into a commander deck that cares about vehicles. And Greasefang might be the commander for a deck like that. Especially like if it works in Brawl, then, or Historic Brawl, then like Greasefang is your commander. But the problem is you can't play Chariot in that deck. One way or the other, I'm building Abzan Chariot with this card like immediately when the set drops, and I want to do it really bad. Oh, and you get to play Fox McCloud as your 1-drop in this deck. Like the deck is shaping up to not be terrible. We don't know what it looks like yet, but it could be all right. I'll give this card a 2.25. Probably greater than I should grade it, but I don't know. The stats for the mana cost are good, and the fact that your opponent can just never be done dealing with vehicles is pretty serious. So I like the card. Hidetsugu Consumes All is next. Now, this could be like a 5-for-1, or it could just be nothing. This card could 3 mana for a 3/1 you have to wait 2 turns for. I think that the deal 10 damage or more and they lose the game is mostly a meme. That'll almost never happen in standard. Like, just basically it won't. I hate that it has haste. Or it doesn't. I hate that it doesn't have haste, I meant to say. If I have to wait till turn 5 to swing with a 3/3, it better have haste. And instead I have to wait till turn 6 to swing with a 3/3. But oh boy, they gave it trample. Come on. The trample is so you can deal this 10 damage more easily. But if you haven't killed them by the time you're able to deal 10 damage to them in one shot, then I don't know what's going on, man. I really don't. The coolest part about this card is the first chapter. And even then, it's only really good in sideboards. I'll give this card a 2. Hinata Dawn Crowned. Okay, so there's a really cynical way you can look at this. This is just a 4-mana 4/4 flyer. And those have not been, by and large, playable for the last few years. A few of them have been, like Moonveil Regent and whatnot. But just being a 4-mana 4/4 flyer is not good enough to see standard play. This one is difficult to cast, even. You know, like Moonveil Region wasn't difficult to cast and it only saw play in one deck. So I don't know, guys. If I'm being cynical here, this card isn't as good as it looks. But on the other hand, it's a Thalia. It's kind of a better Thalia. Spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. Kind of an interesting way of looking at it as a Thalia. And then this spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. Obviously works really well with like Magma Opus. Makes Magma Opus cost like 4 mana. That's very sick. But is the card good enough? Is it playable? I don't know. It's difficult to get on the battlefield and difficult to cast compared to other 4 drops. It does kind of have a form of ward, and that makes it okay. If you untap with it, then suddenly you can go banana pudding, and that's good. But I don't know for a fact that you untap with this card, and that is often what makes cards in Standard bad, is the inability to play them and get any value whatsoever without it dying first. And this card falls in that category, so I think I have to grade it as like a 2, which is going to make a lot of people upset, because I think a lot of people really like this card and expect big things from it. I don't necessarily. But a 2 is still a decent score. Oh my god, Invigorating Hot Spring. I got I got more likes on the tweet about this card than I did on the I'm okay from my heart attack tweet. I don't know how that happened, but I tweeted about this card last night, and I woke up to 500 likes on said tweet. I do not get how this tweet blew up so much. I really don't. But I pointed out this card is in the top 3 most expensive uncommons in the set. And a lot of people were like, well, it's pre-order prices. And it's like, yeah, but still, relative to the other uncommons in the set, that matters here. This is like the most expensive. This card is like $250. So it's actually either the most expensive or the second most expensive uncommon in the set. Why? And people said it was Rhythm of the Wild. And first of all, yes, it's fun to be like, this is the Rhythm of the Wild. It's always fun. It's always super great to do that. But Rhythm of the Wild is not necessarily a better card than this, but it does have a line of text people seem to be forgetting. Rhythm of the Wild has the line of text that says creature spells you control can't be countered. This doesn't have that. Matters so much. Plus, Rhythm of the Wild for the rest of the game gives everything you control haste. And you can like double spell, like you can cast 2 creatures on turn 4 and give them both haste or give them both counters. This doesn't do any of that. It stops eventually. After 4 counters, it stops. It still keeps giving modified creatures you control haste, which is pretty decent. But it's still, at the end of the day, just a thing. People compared it to Fires of Yavimaya, which made me want to throw up. The card is in no way as good as Fires of Yavimaya. Don't even put those 2 cards in the same sentence. Don't do it. This card is not Fires. It's the cards people tended to compare it to. The card is not as good as. The one thing I'll say about this card in comparison with Rhythm is that Rhythm gives the creature either a haste or a +1/+1 counter. This can give the creature both, right? Like you play a creature from your hand, and you give it the +1/+1 counter, and it immediately has haste because you did that. So in some ways, I think it might be better than Rhythm in Standard because of that. Because, by the time you hit turn 7, and this card is no longer relevant, it's not giving counters to anything anymore, you should have won the game by then. Rhythm of the Wild, yeah, it gives haste to your guys all game, and your creatures don't have to be modified and all that, but if you reach turn 7 or 8, you probably lost the game in your Rhythm of the Wild deck. So, in a way, this gives the creatures counters and haste, which is technically better than a Rhythm of the Wild. I could see that, but it's sorcery speed. You can't double spell creatures and give them both counters, give them haste. That was a big sort of mode on Rhythm of the Wild. So I don't think this card is even close to Rhythm. Not even close to Rhythm of the Wild. Porque no los dos in your commander decks and stuff, but in Standard, last thing about this card, people talked in the replies to that Twitter post as though Rhythm of the Wild were a popular card in Standard. It was not. Rhythm of the Wild was not a very played card in Standard. There was not really a green-red haste Rhythm of the Wild deck at the top tiers of Standard. It was not really a thing, but for some reason everyone has tricked themselves in believing that Rhythm of the Wild saw all the Standard play in the world. Not really. Rhythm of the Wild did not see that much standard play. So I don't know where people are getting that idea. Fires saw a lot of standard play 15 years ago. But, and yeah, maybe Rhythm of the Wild did see some standard sideboard play every now and again against like control decks, but you know, 2 of sideboard card in a niche deck that didn't see much play to begin with. I don't know. So I don't think I can really rate this card highly. The worst thing about this card is that you are still in what is ostensibly your Gruul aggro deck, taking off turn 3 to play this card. You can put a counter on your 2-drop. So it's not do nothing. It's not do absolutely nothing. You can put a counter on your 2-drop and swing. So that's good. It's better than a do nothing. But you're still, for the most part, taking off your turn 3 in a format where Reckless Stormseeker is a card you could also play in your Gruul aggro deck. Do you see? Do you see how Reckless Stormseeker is just a better card than this? In an aggro deck that's looking to attack every turn, you really don't want to take off what is ostensibly the most important turn of the game for an aggro deck, to play a setup card. It's not what you want to do. Card's not that good. It's just not. I probably wouldn't play it. I doubt it sees too much play in standard. End of the day, I'll give it a 1.75 just because Monk. That's all. But up next, let's look at Ishin, Two Heavens is One. Now, this is one of my favorite cards in the set. I still don't think it's very good. For standard play, I'm not sure this is a good card. But that doesn't keep me from liking it. I do enjoy the card existing. I like Mardu. Mardu Legends are cool. You know, proccing attack triggers another time is really, really cool. So, like, the card is sweet, and I think there's probably some neat stuff to do with it. But again, you have to wait to attack with it. It doesn't have haste or anything. It doesn't do anything the turn you play it, so you're just taking your turn 3 off. You probably don't have a whole lot of things that proc on attacks that you played on turn 1 or 2. So again, if you have a 2-drop that does something cool when it attacks, then maybe, but probably not. You probably don't. So I don't think the card's very good in standard. I'm going to give it a 1.75 against my own wishes. I'll give it a 1.75. But move on to Jukai Naturalist. It's an enthusiastic Mechanaut, but for enchantments, 2.25, 2.5, like in the same neighborhood, probably 2.25. Kaito Shizuki, the 3-mana Planeswalker that more or less guarantees that it gets to the next turn, which I think is really cool. An interesting way of protecting itself. And then it protects itself by making 1/1s as well. So it can also draw cards. You can just, like, if you attack that turn, it just draws you cards for +1, which is really sick. It does start off on 3 loyalty, which isn't much, but you know, it goes up to 4 the turn you play it, and then you phase it out, and it goes up to 5. So like for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker, that's really good. I think this is one of the better cards in the set as well. I really do. For your 3-mana investment, I think you get a lot out of this Planeswalker, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 3 or a 3.25. I'm not sure what decks you play it in outside of Ninjutsu, but like it could go in control decks. It could. It really could. Despite the abilities not looking super control-y, it could go in control decks. The one thing keeping this from seeing too much play might be the fact that it's a little bit niche and only goes in certain decks, but for your 3-mana investment, I think you are getting a ton from this Planeswalker. If it didn't have the phasing out the first turn he's in play, I think it'd be way worse, but the fact that this can create a ninja and effectively guarantee that you hit your next turn, or you can attack, draw a card, and again guarantee on the next turn that you have a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. They can't just attack into it. I think that's just huge. I think that's just enormous with this card. So I'll give it like a 3.25. The Kami War is next. This is the 5-mana enchantment that blows something away when it ETBs and then becomes a 6/6 later on. If you can play this card, I think it's one of the better cards in Standard. Like if you can get this card onto the battlefield, I think it's pretty ridiculous. And there are multiple ways of getting it on the battlefield without having to pay this 5 mana, but end of the day, probably again a little bit niche. Reminds me of an Elspeth Conquers Death that's probably not as good and much, much harder to play. So I'm just going to give this card a 2. I think it's a solid 2. It might be playable in a deck here or there, but and when you play it, it's going to be one of the better cards in the deck. Like it's going to be one of the reasons you play the deck is to play this card. But still, you know, not going to take over Standard. Katose the Silent Spider is next. I want to like this card, but again, it costs way too much to play. You do get a cool ETB off of it. You do get a very cool ETB, but you probably spent all your mana the turn that you played this. Your opponent may remove it, and then you can't play the thing that you got with it, right? But anytime you get to untap with this on the battlefield, I think it's awesome. I think you get a 5-mana 4/4 body that effectively drew cards for you when it entered the battlefield. That's sweet, right? But is it worth the 5-mana investment to be doing this in Standard? In almost any deck? I'm not too sure. Pretty cool commander, especially cool brawl commander, but I think that's what it's meant for. I don't think it's really balanced for Standard play. I don't think it sees much play there. So I'll give the card a 1.5. Naomi, Pillar of Order, is up next. Another sort of balanced for brawl kind of thing here. I like it because it's Orzhov. I like Orzhov Legends, and I actually think this is somewhat enableable, but I still don't think it's very good. I'll give the card a 1.5. Oni Colt Anvil. If you can get multiple copies of this out, it might be pretty good. But I was thinking about this the other night. If you have 3 copies of this out, 3 copies, you're still only doing 3 a turn, and you're only getting 3 creatures a turn, and that could actually, there are plenty of situations where that's actually just not good enough. It's just not. So like, even if you're enabling this to its fullest extent, there are times when it's just not going to be that impressive. But, in the right deck, it's kind of a witch's oven, because you can sack artifact creatures and whatever. You can sacrifice treasure to it, which you should have enough of those laying around in your Rakdos deck. I think there are enough niche applications for this, and it's not completely niche. It might be one of the best cards in the deck that it's in, but even then, it's just providing you like sort of ancillary value. Like, oh, here's a guy, here's a drain. Let's hope it's good enough. So I'm just going to give this like a 2. I want this to be really good, but even when fully enabled, I don't think it's as good as I want it to be. I have said before, I think it's kind of cat combo in one card. And if it's cat combo in one card, it's good, but it's not, right? Like, you can't block with the token, tap it to sacrifice it, get a token back, because all of this has to happen on your turn. Whenever one or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1. So, again, in that case, you won't be able to block with one of these 1/1s, tap Oni Cold Anvil, sacrifice the 1/1, and get another 1/1. Like, you want this to be cat combo, but it's just not. It's a super fixed cat combo, but I will give it a 2. Prodigy's Prototype is up next. This is a 3-mana 3/4 vehicle in Azorius that can make more power. And I actually don't think this is very good. I want it to have flying, but it doesn't. The stats are interesting, and it crews for relatively little. So I kind of like that. I like making dudes and all that, but I still don't think this is very good. And I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Ryu, Storm's Edge. I also want to like this, but I don't love Hill Giants at rare, so I'll give it a 1.25, despite the fact that it gives you extra combat steps, and despite the fact that this will work really, really well with what's his stupid face up here, Ishin. Get this combat step trigger twice. Like, let's go. That seems really good. But still, just cute. Just cute. So I'll give this card a 1.5. I'll move it up to a 1.5. I still don't think that it's super good, though. But Risona Asari Commander is up next. This could be technically decent against certain control decks if it gets the indestructible counter when it enters the battlefield, or when it attacks. But in a lot of cases, it won't. And even if your opponent, like, let's say you're up against a control opponent, you have your 3 mana on turn 3. You got your haste dude. Haste dudes are good against control, right? Play my haste guy against control. He's guaranteed to get indestructible. Whoops. Removal spell. I know it's just dice to removal, but this guy, even if you play it clean on turn 3 with the haste against control, it is not guaranteed to get the indestructible counter. So I don't know, guys. I don't think this is very good either. I'll give it a 1.5. So Toro Yumazawa. So this, again, another one of these legends that I want to like, but I don't. I really don't. This is extra card advantage every turn, only once a turn. But it is extra card advantage. I think one of the cool things about this is every creature you control can be ninja'd into play. Costs steep, costs 4 mana to do that. But being able to throw a Hullbreaker Horror into play on turn 4 from your hand is obviously really, really tempting. So like, maybe the card is better than I think it is. Like, being able to Hullbreaker Horror and anticipate is pretty gross on turn 4. But I still don't think the card is great. I'm going to give this a 2.25. Somewhere in that neighborhood, because if the card is busted, then it's very busted. I don't think you're ninjutsuing ninjas into play. Let me just put it that way. Satsuki the Living Lore is next. Really cool dude, Selesnya Legend, 2 mana for a 1/3. Manipulates, sagas and stuff. but I still don't think it's great. I still actually don't think it's great. And honestly, when it dies, nothing could happen. It's got a dies trigger with 2 different modes, but it's still, if it dies, like if it just gets killed in the early game or something, there's plenty of options. There's plenty of ways like nothing can happen off the dies trigger. So I don't know. I think it's really cool. Again, this is one that looks balanced for brawl play or commander play, but not necessarily, I'd say brawl play more than commander. I don't know if we have enough sagas. Well, do we? We probably have enough sagas now to do a saga commander deck. Either way, this is your commander in that deck. But I don't think this is very standard playable. Unless something crazy happens. I think I'm going to give this card like a 2.25. Silver Fur Master is up next. Really cool Ninja and Rogue Anthem effect. We now have multiple Anthem effects for Rogues. So are they back? I think I'm going to give Master Splinter a 2.5. I think this is actually a really good card for Ninjas and Rogues. Goes in both of those. Not just a niche piece for one deck. Obviously goes in 2 decks. Does it make either of those decks good? I don't know, but I actually think Ninjas has a chance at being a good deck. I do. I'm kind of more into mono... Don't tell anybody. But I'm kind of more into sort of mono-blue tempo ninjas than I am this blue-black ninjas deck. I really am. But at the same time, I think that if blue-black ninjas is in the deck, this goes in. If blue-black rogues wants to become a deck again, this goes in. Just a solid card. 2.5. Spirit Sister's Call. Good lord. Spirit Sister's Call, I think, may be one of the best cards in the set. Now, a couple of minds on this. First of all, in Commander, you can get back an Omniscience with this. You can sacrifice it and get an Omniscience, or you can sacrifice like a crappy, like a wedding invitation, you know, like a 2 or 3 mana enchantment, and get back an Omniscience. So there are cool things you can do with it there. And in Standard, if they print like a 9 or 10 mana enchantment, then obviously, or something like that, a 9 or 10 mana Planeswalker even, then like this is a way to do it. But for the most part, a lot of our reanimation spells in Standard cost 5 mana. This has the ability to get any permanent card, which no other reanimation spell can do. So I like that versatility. Any permanent is great. However, in terms of actually getting mana value, paying 5 to reanimate something isn't the best mana value. Even if you're reanimating something that costs 7 or whatever, like you don't feel super good about it. Where this card is going to be best is when you get multiple triggers off of it, right? When you get the trigger from the first turn, trigger from the second turn, trigger from the third turn, and this card slowly starts to take over the game, you know? I think that's where this card is going to be good. I've compared it to God Pharaoh's Gift in the past, and I think that's a pretty good comparison. I'm going to stick with that comparison. I think this has the potential to fly under the radar a bit and kind of be one of the more powerful cards in the set, especially if mid-range lives. If mid-range lives in this format, this has the potential to be a broken card. 5 mana is a lot of startup investment, but it's not a do-nothing. It does something the turn it comes into play. And you can just trade like a token. You can just trade like a treasure token for a really good artifact. You know, you can trade like a 2 mana enchantment for a ridiculous enchantment. You can trade this for a ridiculous enchantment. You can trade a token creature for a 7/7 in your yard. There is no limit to the sort of, it almost feels like a recurring nightmare, almost, from way back in the day. A card like this, or Survival of the Fittest recurring nightmare sort of combo from way back in the day on one card. In Orzhov. So I'm obligated to like it because Orzhov is my guild. But I think that I'm looking at the card objectively. This isn't some sort of bias because it's Orzhov. I've admitted plenty of Orzhov cards were crap in this exercise so far. I do, however, think this has the potential to be one of the better cards in the entire set. The Fires of Invention of the set. You know, during spoiler season, we're like, this card looks like crap. It turns out it just makes ridiculous mana value every single turn. It's the best card you could play in Standard. I think this has the potential to be that. So I'm going to give this a 3. Solid 3. I think this is one of the better cards in the set. Tamiyo, Completed Sage up next. Really cool Planeswalker that can be played modally, right? Not only does it have 3 modes on it, but it can be cast 2 different ways, which I think is really cool. And then once you cast it, depending on which way you cast it, then you can do different things with it. I don't know. I really like the versatility on this. I love the -X ability. I love that the -X, it doesn't put the thing onto the battlefield, but it creates a copy of the card. So it feels like you're just putting a thing directly onto the battlefield. So if you've had Tamiyo in play for a couple of turns, or if it's late in the game and you play it as a 5 loyalty planeswalker, you can effectively trade her with the Wrenn and 7 that's in your yard. That seems very good. In sort of a Sultai or Bant control deck, if you've had Tamiyo in play for a couple of turns, lock down a creature twice and then get back the Hullbreaker Horror from your graveyard that you discarded a while back, it all seems very, very good to me. I think the plus ability is a decent ability when it comes to protection, protecting herself and all that. I think this is a fine Planeswalker and probably the second best in the set. Well, it could be the third best in the set. I think that right now the order goes Wandering Emperor, Kaito, Tamiyo, Tezzeret is what I think we're looking at. But, you know, Tezzeret being the third best Planeswalker in their set means she's still a playable walker. I think there's a lot of good on this card. The fact that you can protect on one mode and get not just card advantage. Again, it's not just card advantage. It's directly onto the battlefield. Kind of card advantage on the -X. I think the -X is going to be the key ability on this card. I think the -X is going to be the ability that defines how playable this card is. And it looks pretty playable from that perspective. There's a lot that I'd want to trade in my graveyard with this card. Not even trade. You know, if I play this for 5 mana, then I get a 5 loyalty walker. I can get a 4-drop back. I can get a 4-drop back from my graveyard and still have a 1 loyalty planeswalker. And that's really good value. Like, that's so good. So I think Tamiyo, again, if mid-range lives, is a fantastic planeswalker, especially if there's a Bant or Sultai deck in the format. And it looks like there probably is. This card could see some play. So I'm going to give you, again, a solid 3. I think Tamiyo lives at about a 3. Or 2.75. Maybe slightly underneath a 3. Just a really, really good, solid Magic card. Automated Artificer brings us into the artifacts. We're almost done. Let me take the last sip of coffee. That's all I got left. It better be enough. Let's look at Automated Artificer in the artifacts, which is hard to say, by the way. Wouldn't have been able to do it without a fresh throat. But in any case, this is a 2-mana rock. It's a 2-mana rock that ramps. You can only cast artifacts or play abilities and stuff, but still, this is going to see some play in my decks, right? Like the Forsaken Monument artifact decks that want to tap things for colorless. This taps for 2 colorless when you have a monument out. And it ramps you into your monument. You know, it ramps you into a turn 3, 4-drop, like a Myriad Construct or something, or even an Asika's Chariot, because Asika's Chariot is an artifact. So you can ramp into Chariot with this. That's somewhat relevant. I just really like this card. I like these sort of tentative 2-mana rocks they've been printing lately. And this one is one of the best that I've seen them print, period, in the last few sets. You know, what do we get? Orb of Dragonkind. We got the thing that's a 4-mana legend in green on one side. And on the other side, it's a 2-mana rock that only taps for green, but you can only play like creatures with it. There's some sort of downside to that one too. As far as those 2-mana rocks go, I think this is one of the best ones that we've seen so far. Can't just be shocked either, right? You have to deal 3 damage to it. It can block in the early game. There's just this. It's cool. I think Daft Punk is kind of a good little card, honestly. So, but again, niche, only sees play in artifact decks, and those probably won't be very good. But I'll still give the card a 2. I think it's pretty cool. Bronze Cudgels is up next. This card is terrible. I'm fairly certain this is a really, really bad Magic card. So I'm going to give it a 1. Brute Suit and Yazoot Suit is up next. This is also fairly bad. Just cruise for 1, and it's a 4/3, but you don't want to play this card. It's a 1. Circuit Mender is up next. This is the thing that does everything. It's like really good with teleportation circle, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to give this card a 2. Cool role player in certain decks, but probably won't even actually see much standard play, if any. Containment Construct. Am I wrong? Is this card stupid good? Is this card really, really good? Is this card so good? It could be. But then again, it's just, this card also, I think, helps illustrate that for 2 mana, you can print damn near anything on a creature. And so long as you don't also give the creature hexproof, ward, or indestructible, it's probably going to be fine. This card's probably just fine. So I don't know how good it actually is, but the text box looks stupid to me. So I'm going to give this card like a 2.25. I think if it finds the right deck to do stuff, it could be the best card in its deck. I really do. But Dramatis Poet is a puppet, rather, is up next. This is 4 mana for a 2/4. When it enters the battlefield for each kind of counter on a permanent, put another counter of that kind on it or remove one from it. Now, I want to point this out. I read the entire text box because this is one of the most expensive commons in the set. Last I checked, this was $1.25 to buy a copy of this card. I don't know why. Maybe there's a combo or something. Maybe it's people think it's good with Planeswalkers. The card looks terrible. Don't play. I know it proliferates. Like, I get that it proliferates one thing, but don't do it. Don't play this card. I don't think Puppet is very good. We'll move on to Eater of Virtue. This, I do think, is actually quite good. I think this is maybe the best equipment in Standard. Ball the Skyclaves gives it a run for its money, but we don't have Embercleave anymore, right? So I think this almost instantly becomes like the best equipment. It's only 1 to cast, and it's only 1 to equip, and it gives +2/+0. It's a Bone Splitter. It's a good Magic card. Like, it just kind of is good in a lot of aggro decks. For just 2 mana, you go ahead and play it, attach it to something, get swinging with your flyer. And if your opponent kills your flyer, the next thing you equip this with, which, mind you, will only cost 1 mana, will then get +2/+0 in flying. So, I don't know, guys. I think Eater is pretty good. It has to find the right aggro deck. It immediately slots into the equipments deck in red and white. The Boros equipments deck that I talked about close to the top of the video. I now get to sort of come full circle and talk about that deck again. Probably not a full 4 copies because it's legendary, but the deck could still at least take some copy of this card. I don't think that this card makes that deck amazing or anything, but I will say if we see the right aggro decks, this could easily see some play. If we see some aggro decks that have these keyword abilities that make this card really good, like maybe a 1 of in mono white, because if they kill your Elite Spellbinder, you equip this to Elite Spellbinder, you have like 5 power flying Elite Spellbinder for just the 1 mana investment to equip it. And then they kill your Elite Spellbinder. The next thing you equip this to, +2/+0 in flying. I'm telling you, it's not bad, just in random regular aggro decks. But if you get the kind of aggro decks that have the right keyword abilities to really enable this thing working, like, I'm serious. The card could take off. But even as just Bone Splitter, the baseline on the card is it's a Bone Splitter, still a playable Magic card. The card gets a 3, and I'm serious. It is that good. You just have to find the slot for it in your deck. Worst thing about the card is the opportunity cost. The absolute worst thing is the opportunity cost. But if you're looking for a 1 mana artifact in Standard, this is one of the best ones. If you're looking for a decent, sort of thing to give you some reach in your aggro deck, this is one of the better cards you can be playing. It's just the cheapest possible investment to play and equip. Very good card. Ecologist Terrarium is up next. This is neat, but not great. I will give it a 1. Probably doesn't see too much play in Standard. High Speed Hoverbike might see play in the Mono Blue Tempo deck. It is pretty good. All of your guys that you play as 1 mana 1/1s that fly or whatever on turn 1, they lose relevance relatively quickly in the game, but they can then be used to crew this, and it's a lot more relevant to swing with a 2/2 flyer than it is a 1/1. So I kind of like that about this card. The card isn't expensive to play in the first place. It has flash, so it keeps your opponent from attacking with a guy, and then it gets in with flying on the next turn. I think this is kind of just a perfect bread and butter card for a sort of mono blue tempo deck, and I can't wait to see if it's good enough. But on its face, I'll give the card like a 2. I think it's just a solid card. But Iron Apprentice is up next. This looks like the Big Hero 6 guy, the Fully Cooley guy that the dude on the red card is working on. He's up and running. The card is not good. You might think the card is good because it's kind of just oh god, what is that? What is the name of the ability? Modular. It's basically just a modular dude. But I don't think it's going to be good most of the time. So let's move on to Mech Titan Core. Very awkward card. If you can actually get it to work, it's probably okay. But if you can't get it to work, it still doesn't have any sort of built-in protection of any kind. I don't know. Card is neat. Card is fun, but that's about all that it is. It could be a payoff for artifact decks, but I think there's probably just better payoffs for artifact decks. End of the day, I'll give the card a 1.75. It's neat. Mirror Box. Let's piss off every Commander player in the audience by giving this card a 1.5 right now. I think this card might enable some cool combos. Even in Standard, it might enable cool combos. But again, I just do not like paying 3 mana and taking my turn off. you are probably taking your turn 3 off to play this card. In Standard, dangerous proposition. I don't know that I'd do it. However, speaking as non-spike, loves janky stuff dev, the card is really cool. The card is awesome. But we are judging specifically for Standard playability here. I'm pretty sure this is like a 1.5 or a 1.75. Up next is Network Terminal. I will give this card the exact same score, 1.5, 1.75 in that range. I actually think this is one of the better 3-mana rocks you could play in Standard right now. Probably not better than the Celestis, but comparable to the Celestis. It really is. There's a point in the game where you can enable this much easier than Celestis, actually. So, like, who knows? Deceptively good 3-mana rock here. Ninja's Kunai is next. This is a deceptively good limited card. It really is. Or like a card in like a mono blue deck that otherwise can't do much damage. We've actually just recently, we saw a card very similar to this. See some play. God, I can't remember what the name of the card was, but it was an artifact that was relatively cheap to sack and deal damage to a thing. And the reason it saw play was because there was something in the format that could give protection. Protection from a color. And so sometimes that would see like 2 of sideboard play. So you could kill a creature without having to deal with like whatever white card it was that gave them protection from a thing. All Seed of Life's Bounty. That's what it was. This is a way to get around All Seed of Life's Bounty. Ninja's Kunai, I don't really think there's much in the format like All Seed right now that you have to worry about. But if a card like that does come up, yeah, you remember the mono white tech against Archon? It existed, I promise. Or against, yeah, Eidolon? Anyway, is the 1-drop. All Seed of Life's Bounty. All Seed. It was the tech against All Seed. So if that situation comes up again, then Kunai, I think, is actually better than that card. So, like, this could see sparing sideboard play. And again, in Limited, this is a better removal piece than it looks like. Kind of a bolt. I'm just going to give this card like a 1.25. I don't think it's very good. Papercraft Decoy. Looks like it should be good. Is not good. Maybe play it in Limited where it fills out your curve. It's an artifact. Sometimes you'll draw a card off of it and all that. But in Standard, it's not playable. It's a 1. Patchwork Automaton. I think this card might be very good. Like, super good. Look at the ward on it. The ward makes this so that I think you can even play this in, like, Modern and Historic because your opponent can't just immediately pay, like, 1 mana to kill it. And it's bad. You know, like, I don't know, guys. I think that, especially in a format like Historic, this hits kind of a sweet spot where there may be better options to play than this in Modern, right? But in Standard, there aren't enough good artifacts to enable it. In Historic, I think you've got the best of both worlds, right? In Historic, you've got this might be one of the best options you can play at 2 mana for your artifact deck. And there's nothing way better than it. But there's also a ton of artifacts that can enable it. This could easily get to like a 5/5 by turn 4. Pretty easily. So there's something about this card that I really, really like. If it didn't have the ward on it, I wouldn't suggest playing it at all. But the fact that you'll play this on turn 2 and very likely untap with it on turn 3 makes it a lot safer to play. So I'm going to give this card like a 2.25. I actually think this card is kind of good. But Reckoner Bankbuster is next. This card is unbelievable. This is a Maze Mind Tome that can also attack as a 4/4. It also just makes guys, like it makes a 1/1 guy eventually that can crew it. That's also sick, you know, like if it does end up in your mono black control deck and you play it like a Maze Mind Tome, you don't really have to play other creatures in your deck. I mean, you should, right? Because your opponent just kills your guy and you never crew this anymore. But still, you don't technically have to play creatures in your deck. Like this makes a thing that can crew it. So there's a lot of super sick stuff. By the time, I don't know, guys. I don't know. I think this is just better than Maze Mind Tome. And Maze Mind Tome was a card that I loved and saw a ton of play. Not as much play. Like earlier, I hit people for saying that Rhythm of the Wild saw a lot of play. Maze Mind Tome saw more play than Rhythm of the Wild, but not enough play to call it a standard staple. Not anywhere near enough play to call it a standard staple. Kind of saw play in a mono black deck that was sort of teetering on the brink of playability at the time and all that. Really popular arena deck, but didn't really do much on the top tiers of standard. So I will say, however, that this is probably, although maybe not one of the best cards in the set, It's probably one of the best artifacts in a set that cares about artifacts. It's probably one of the best vehicles in the set, if not the best vehicle in the set. Just the fact that it's a Maze Mind Tome, I think makes the card good enough. But instead of Maze Mind Tome gaining you 4 life when it goes away or whatever, this can technically gain you way more life than that by blocking creatures that would have otherwise dealt damage to you. That's a form of gaining life if you really want to look it through the kaleidoscope. But this can also just finish the game. Maze Mind Tome could never end a game, and this can, you know? Really, really neat. Really, really neat thing. It also plays through your own Blood on the Snow. This does a cool thing, by the way, in Mono Black Blood on the Snow that I haven't seen anybody bring up yet. I haven't seen a single person talk about this. But in Mono Black Blood on the Snow, you play this just like you would your Maze Mind Tome, right? And then when you hit your Blood on the Snow, you have this on the table. You hit your Blood on the Snow. You bring back your Lolth. You make 2 spiders, and you use the 2 spiders to crew this guy and swing in for 4. That's sick. That's like super sick if you don't have to worry about like blocking, and you probably don't because you just hit a Blood on the Snow. So there are some really neat like lines with this. It gives decks card draw that otherwise wouldn't have it, but it also gives decks a big 4/4 fat boy that otherwise wouldn't have that either. I think the card is very, very good. Very, very good. Maze Mind saw play in control decks that had better options. You know, I will say though, like right now, blue decks have access to like Memory Deluge, so I don't think they would ever play a card like Maze Mind now. But some blue decks did play Maze Mind Tome back in the day. And I just think that this is in a lot of ways an upgraded Maze Mind Tome. I'm going to give this card a 2.75. One of my favorite cards in the set. Raito's Sentinel is next. The card's bad. Don't look at it. It's a bad card. It's a 1. Runaway Trashbot is really interesting, guys. It's really, really neat card. If you can find a way to give this haste and just flip your library over into your graveyard, swing with this, win game. It's a way. There's a step 2 is question marks, but step 3 is profit. Like there's a way to make Runaway Trashbot like a playable Magic card that literally wins you the game when you play it. Like there's a way to do this. We just have to find a way to flip our library over into our graveyard. We have to find a way to give this haste or find a way to give it hexproof or indestructible. If we can figure out all or most of those things, I think we actually have a playable combo piece on our hands. But as it is, I'll give the card a 1.5. I don't think it's that good. Searchlight Companion is up next. This is 3 mana for a 1/1 flyer that also gives you a 1/1. It's not very good. It's just not. I'll give this a 1. Shrine Steward is up next. This searches your library for a shrine card at the low cost of 5 mana. I'll give this card a 1.75. I don't think it sees play in shrines, but I think they'll try. I think they'll try for a couple of weeks before they put it away. Surge Hacker Mech is next, though. This is, aside from maybe Maze Mind Tome vehicle, this might be my pick for best vehicle in the set. Surge Hacker Mech is 4 mana for a 5/5 vehicle with Menace. When it ETBs, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and you crew it for 4. Now, what this does, I want to point out what this does completely dry. And this is something else I haven't heard really anybody talk about. This is sort of, bear with me here, and open your heart to this argument. This is tech against Esika's Chariot. This blocks and kills an Esika's Chariot. It costs the same to play as an Esika's Chariot. When you play it, you don't have to have any other vehicles in play, just it. And it deals 2 damage to a target. That means it can kill one of the cats and keep your opponent's Esika's Chariot from crewing in the first place. This feels to me like anti-Esika's Chariot tech. It really does. And that makes me actually really like this card. Also, a 5/5 Menace isn't bad. It crews for the same PT that Esika's Chariot crews for, right? If you are playing it in a vehicles deck, it's possible that you have Esika's Chariots of your own. So, like, you know, you play an Esika's Chariot, and then the next turn you play this, and you're able to kill something. Like, you're able to hit something for 4 damage. Right? And then you use the cats to crew the chariot or whatever, and later on you use the cats to crew this instead. Like, I don't know. Like, I actually don't think this is the worst card. Remember, you can crew into a vehicle that crews another vehicle. You can do that. Like, you can crew your Asika's chariot and then use your chariot to crew this if you wanted to. But one way or the other, I think there's more to this card than there looks to be at first glance. I think that the removal mode on it is really good. It's not Flame Tongue Kavu, but it does have better stats than Flame Tongue Kavu, and an evasive ability, and it blocks Asika's chariots and kills them. I don't know, guys. This looks better to me than it does to a lot of people. I will give this card a 2.25. But we'll move on to Thundersteel Colossus. This is 7 mana for a 7/7 Trample Haste Crew 2. It's bad. It's 7 mana. Don't play it. It's a 1. Tawashi Guidebot. This is tempting, but it's 4 mana, and it's a 1 toughness creature. Don't do it. Now, it could be a 2 toughness creature. You could get a 3/2 when you play this. And it could also be just tap, draw card if you have enough modified guys. But boy, does it take a lot of hoops to get through to get that. Don't play the card. It's a 1. Walking Skyscraper. Cost 1 less for each modified guy. And it's a trample hexproof as long as it's untapped, 8/8, blah, blah, blah. Don't play this guy. Don't play it. It's not worth the slot in your deck. It's not good. Don't play the guy. It's not good. Don't play it. It's not good. It's a 1. I'll give this guy a 1.5. I will give this guy a 1.5, but you still shouldn't play it. Life Gain Duels, they always get a 1.5 every time. Before we go through the legendary lands one by one, let's look at Mech Hanger. Mech Hanger, I will give... Mech Hanger, I'll give a 2.25. That's the one that just crews vehicles for you. Roadside Reliquary. This is really good in the artifact decks and the artifact enchantment decks. But in like Forsaken Monument, where it not only taps for double colorless once you have Monument out, but it also just helps you draw a card. Even if it only draws 1 card for you, it's still pretty fine. So I like it there. I like it in Commander, but in Standard, it probably won't see too much play on real tables. So I have to give the card like a 2. Secluded Courtyard is the other non-legendary land. This card is very good and allows us to more easily do stuff like that Red-White Warriors deck I've been talking about, that Blue-Black Ninjas deck that you might want to play, Black-Red Vampires, right? Like, this allows us to more easily play those decks, and I think that's actually going to be huge and have like this massive impact on the format. So I will give this a 3. I will give this card a 3.25 as a matter of fact. One of the best cards in the set so far. But let's move back up here so we can talk about these legendary lands. Looks like we're going to go in order of best to worst, if I had to guess. But Boseiju, Who Endures, a lot of people call this the best one. I do not. I don't think this is the best one. But I still think this card is an easy 4. Easy 4. I mean, there's just no opportunity cost to it whatsoever. You play it every time you see it, or you play it every time you can. It doesn't come into play tapped. There's literally no reason not to play this card unless you're in Snow. And even if you're in Snow, you probably play 1 copy of this card. Really very sick card. Play it. It's a 4. Iganjo. Again, maybe I'm high. Maybe I'm on the ganja. But I think this card is the best of this cycle. Pretty easily. 3 mana is a lot. 3 mana is a lot. But the fact that it's a removal spell, and I want to say this about this card. Like in mono green, this card doesn't go as well as this card goes in mono white. Mono green is a snow deck that wants to play Blizzard Brawl. So there's that, right? You get penalized for playing this card. Also, mono green doesn't have a whole lot of legendary creatures. Not really. However, in mono white, you don't have to play Snow anymore because Faceless Haven is banned. So you don't really have to play Snow. So you're not really as penalized for playing this card. You also play Thalia on turn 2 in like 50% of games. So this card is much better for mono white than this card is for mono green, because you have a legend. This allows you to just channel this card for 2 mana with, and you're not as punished for playing non-snow cards. So just as far as its effect on this standard environment, I think the mono white one is better than the mono green one. But even just in a vacuum, I think the white one is better than the green one. Just in a vacuum, you get a land that is also a removal spell, and that's unbelievable. That's so good. So I'll give this card a 4.5. I think this is about as close to a perfect card as we're going to see in this set. So let's revise this. 4.25 for Boseiju, 4.5 for Iganjo. I think it's probably the best card in the set. Iganjo. Otawara, which is how you're supposed to say it. Otara, the Soaring City. Also extremely good. I do not care that this is 4 mana. 4 mana sounds like a lot to bounce a thing. Don't care. Note that the way they worded this, you can also bounce man lands. You can bounce creature lands. It does not say non-land permanent. So it is specifically good against creature lands. And that's like an extra wrinkle to the card. A lot of cool stuff about Atara. I don't think it's better than just a straight up removal spell on a land, right? But look at blue-white control, you guys. Blue-white control has a 4 mana flash planeswalker they can play now that's really good. And they have a removal spell in their mana base and another removal spell in their mana base. Like, how good is blue-white control looking? It's kind of a little bit sick. Like, blue-white control doesn't have to use opportunity cost to do anything in their deck. Just really sick looking card here, though. Even if I don't think it's quite as good as the white one, I'll still give this one a solid 4.25. I think this is a very good card. And you think 4 mana is a lot? It's not so much. It's not when it comes on a land with no opportunity cost that always comes into play untapped. That you can do this instead. I think this is really good. Like, really, really good. Let's see. So Kinzan and the black one. They're okay, yeah. So Kinzan is 2 1/1 guys with haste for 4 mana. I actually think this is probably decent too, especially if you do, say, play Goro Goro in the mono red deck, because it's a 2-drop legend, right? So since it's a 2-drop legend, that drops this to 3 mana for 2 1/1 guys with haste or whatever. On a land, that's quite good. Like, it could also be a land. If you're having trouble getting your land drops, play this as a land, untapped, on like turn 3 or whatever. If you're flooding and you've gotten too many lands in the early game or in the mid game or whatever, suddenly this being 2 1/1 guys for just like 3 or 4 mana actually isn't bad. Note that Channel is instant speed too, so you don't have to play this offensively in like a Jeskai deck or something like that, a red-blue deck. This can be played defensively as blockers. That's also fine. Again, at the cost of literally nothing. At 0 opportunity cost. This does not even take a slot in your deck. And you just kind of get to play a free spell where you would have played a land instead. Like, you would have just played a basic mountain instead of this card. So there's just no penalty to putting the card in your deck whatsoever. The card is still good. A lot of people call it the worst of the cycle. I still think this card is quite good. 2 bodies instant speed on a land, sure. The last one, though, is the Abandoned Mire. This is a Raise Dead, but I think this one sees, they all probably see play. I think the red one is the least likely to see play at the moment, though, because the black one sees play day 1 in a deck that already exists. They don't have to, we don't have to make up decks for this. Blue-white control doesn't exist. A Jeskai control deck that wants the red one doesn't really exist, right? This deck exists. The mono black and the maybe the black-white Blood on the Snow decks might want this. Now, the black-white ones, not as guaranteed, because, Blood on the Snow has to play snow. Has to play snow, and that deck has to play 2 colors worth of snow. The mono-black Snow deck probably wants this card, though, as at least a 1 or 2 of, because it can get Planeswalkers back. If it was just a creature, it'd be different. This can get Planeswalkers, though, and that deck is really heavy on Planeswalkers. So a land that has the ability to get back a Loth or a Sorin or whatever, yeah, I think it's worth cutting into your Snow mana base to play a copy or 2 of this card. I really do think it is. So sees play day 1, and even outside of those decks, just any deck with black that also has creatures and or Planeswalkers just wants the card. So, like, you could see the card seeing play in Sultai or something like that, right? But altogether, I do think we reread these cards in the proper order, except maybe you flip the black and red one. I'm not sure which is the better one out of those 2. But I do think the green, white, and blue ones are the best of the Legendary Land cycle. And I'll probably repeat all of this for the top 50. For the top 25 is what I think we're going to... I think we got it down to 25. I really do. But that, ladies and gentlemen, we did it. We did it. 3 hours and 34 minutes. 3 hours and 34 minutes. That's way too long. I was supposed to be back in the living room by like 10 o'clock because that's when Righteous Gemstones comes on. But instead I've gone like an hour over time here. Not really the best speed run ever. But we still did it. we still did it, everybody. I can hit unrecord after I sign off on YouTube. Hey, YouTube, love you. Spread love and be kind. Do the YouTube stuff. Like the video. Subscribe. Do the things. Hit up the Patreon down there. It's $1 a month to vote on content. Check me out on Twitch. That's where we did this. Don't you want to be part of this live? Don't you want to be in the chat for this? Check out Twitch. It's free to follow. Or if you have Amazon Prime in your house, it is free to sub to one Twitch streamer a month. If you're not using your Amazon Prime on a Twitch streamer, might as well use it on your dude, because your dude is out here putting his voice and body on the line, as well as his sanity, doing stupid garbage like this every previous season. I love you all, and I suppose that I will catch you cats later. I am Deb from The Place, having the time of my life reviewing Magic cards tonight. Spread love, and be kind. Bye, everybody.